In the year 1864, a voice began to speak from the shadows of the modern world. A voice that did not sing praises to progress or to the enlightened age of reason, but instead hissed with a spiteful and venomous intelligence. It was a voice that belonged to no one, and yet to everyone, the nameless, faceless, and profoundly familiar sound of a soul at war with itself. This was the voice of the underground man, a creature born from the damp gray squalor of St. Petersburg and the feverish, brilliant mind of Fyodor Dostoevsky. This work, Notes from the Underground, is not a novel in the traditional sense. It is a confession, a tirade, a philosophical treatise disguised as the rambling of a madman. It is the overture to all of Dostoevsky's later, greater works, a raw and concentrated dose of the paradoxes that would come to define his art. And it begins not with a story, but with a direct, almost confrontational, address to the reader, a declaration of being from a man who feels he has ceased to be. "I am a sick man," he begins. "I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man." These are the opening shots in his war against us, against society, and most of all, against himself. He is a retired civil servant in his 40s, living in a miserable corner of the city, a place he calls his underground. This is not a literal cellar, but a far deeper, more terrifying prison. It is the state of profound spiritual isolation, of a man who has retreated so far into his own mind that he has lost all connection to the world of the living. He is a creature of pure, agonizing contradiction. He is intelligent, but his intelligence has brought him only misery. He is acutely sensitive to beauty and the sublime, but he is drawn irresistibly to filth and degradation. He tells us his liver is diseased, but he refuses to see a doctor out of pure spite, not to harm the doctors, but to harm himself. His suffering is the one thing he truly owns, the one thing he has cultivated, and he cherishes it as a miser cherishes his gold. For in his pain he finds the only proof that he truly exists. His great enemy, the object of his endless, silent rage, is the prevailing optimism of his time. The new and fashionable idea that humanity was, at its core, a rational creature. The European thinkers and their Russian disciples were proclaiming that science and reason could solve all of human society's problems. They argued that if you could simply educate a man, show him logically where his own true advantage lies, he would naturally, inevitably, and gratefully become good and noble. This idea promised a future utopia, a perfect, harmonious society, where all human actions were calculated, where every problem was solved, and where suffering was a thing of the past. This future was symbolized for Dostoevsky by the magnificent Crystal Palace, a massive structure of iron and glass, built in London for the Great Exhibition. It was a monument to human ingenuity, a shining testament to the power of reason, a promise of a future where everything was organized, transparent, and perfect. To the underground man, this Crystal Palace is not a paradise. It is the ultimate horror. It is a beautiful, glittering, and inescapable prison. A human anthill where people would live in perfect safety and perfect boredom. He sees it as a world where the very concept of choice has been rendered obsolete, for in a perfect world there is only one correct rational choice for every situation, and to deviate from it would be illogical. It would be, in a word, insane. He sees this tyranny of reason, embodied in the simple, brutal finality of a mathematical equation. The statement 2 + 2 = 4, he says, is not a simple fact. It is an impertinence, a bully. It stands there, arms akimbo, barring your path, a stone wall of objective fact that leaves no room for your own will, your own desire. It simply is, and you are expected to submit to it, without question. But for the underground man, this submission is a form of spiritual death. For what is a man if he is not free to choose his own path, even if that path leads to his own destruction? This is the core of his rebellion. He argues, with a desperate, feverish energy, that the rationalists have fundamentally misunderstood humanity. They believe a man's greatest desire is his own advantage, his own profit. But the underground man knows better. He knows that sometimes a man's greatest advantage is to desire something harmful, something stupid, something utterly contrary to his own well-being, for in that single irrational choice he asserts the one thing that is more precious to him than any advantage, his own free will. He argues that man will smash the perfect order of the Crystal Palace to pieces, will send all logic to the devil, just so he can live according to his own stupid will. He is not a piano key played upon by the laws of nature. He is not an organ stop in the great machine of society. He is a creature who will sometimes knowingly, gratefully, and passionately choose suffering over happiness. He will choose a toothache over a perfect bill of health, simply because the toothache is his, a product of his own flawed, unique, and unpredictable being, while the perfect health is a gift from a system he despises. This is the meaning behind his most famous and most challenging declaration. In a world that insists that 2 + 2 = 4, in a world that demands he accept the stone wall of objective fact, the ultimate act of human freedom, the fine, desperate cry of the individual against the tyranny of the whole, is to stand up, clench his fist, and declare that 2 + 2 = 5 is a very charming little thing too. It is not a mathematical statement, it is a spiritual one. It is the assertion of the human will against the cold, dead logic of the universe. But this grand rebellion has a terrible price. The source of his insight is also the source of his misery. He is afflicted with what he calls the disease of hyper-consciousness. He simply thinks too much. He is too aware. He cannot perform a single action without immediately analyzing it from 1,000 different angles, without seeing the absurdity, the shame, and the contradiction in every possible motive. A normal man, a man of action, he says, is able to function only because he is fundamentally stupid. He sees a simple cause, like an injustice, and he moves towards a simple effect, like revenge. And he is content he does not question his own motives, because his mind is not a labyrinth of infinite reflections. The underground man, however, is trapped in this labyrinth. He is so conscious of his own consciousness that he is paralyzed. He feels an insult, and he wants to take revenge, but then he immediately thinks, is my anger truly noble, or is it just petty vanity? Is my enemy truly evil, or am I just projecting my own insecurities onto him? This endless cycle of analysis and self-doubt leaves him in a state of inertia, a spiritual paralysis that prevents him from ever truly acting. He cannot be a hero, but his consciousness also prevents him from being a true apologetic villain. He cannot even be an insect. For an insect has a defined purpose, but he has none. He is nothing but a consciousness, a quivering nerve of awareness, trapped in the amber of his own intellect, and this is why the second half of his story is a collection of humiliating anecdotes. They are the stories of his failed attempts to be a man of action, to break free from his inertia and impose his will upon the real world. He spends years planning to bump into an army officer who once insulted him. And when he finally does it, the officer doesn't even notice. He forces his way into a dinner party with old school friends who despise him, only to make a pathetic, drunken fool of himself. His every attempt to be a character in a story ends in farce. His most revealing and most shameful story involves his encounter with Liza, a young prostitute whom he tries to save by lecturing her with sentimental, borrowed ideas about love and family. But when she, in her simple, honest compassion, actually comes to him for help, he is so horrified by the reality of a genuine human connection that he can only respond with cruelty. He humiliates her, he gives her money as a final insult, and then collapses in a fit of self-loathing after she is gone. He is a man who can conceive of the sublime, but can only produce the squalid. His hyper-consciousness has made him a stranger to the very humanity he so desperately and secretly craves. The underground man is Dostoevsky's great prophecy. He is a warning against the hubris of reason, a chilling portrait of what happens to a soul when it is stripped of faith, of community, of any connection to a truth outside of its own endlessly reflecting mind. He is the father of all of Dostoevsky's great tormented protagonists. For Raskolnikov's theory, Stavrogin's ennui, and Ivan Karamazov's rebellion are all just grander, more tragic expressions of the same spiteful, paradoxical, and profoundly human voice that first cried out from the darkness of the underground. Before Dostoevsky, many thinkers had questioned the existence of God, but he was one of the first great artists to ask a far more terrifying and practical question. What happens to the human soul when its belief in God dies? He saw that the foundation of Western morality, the shared belief in a divine order, in a sacred external source of right and wrong, was crumbling, and he understood that this was not just a philosophical problem, it was a profound psychological and spiritual cataclysm, a death of God that would leave humanity adrift in a silent, empty, and terrifyingly free universe. This was not a celebration for Dostoevsky, it was a diagnosis of a profound crisis. For if God does not exist, then the very concepts of good and evil lose their absolute meaning. They become relative, man-made constructs. And if man is the one who creates morality, then what is to stop man from declaring himself the new God? This is the birth of one of his most powerful and prophetic concepts, the idea of the man-God, the individual who in a godless world attempts to seize divine authority for himself, to become his own lawgiver and to reshape the world according to his own will. The first great portrait of this attempt is Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov. He is the prototype, the young theorist who dares to put the idea into practice. His extraordinary man theory is not merely a justification for a simple transgression. It is a claim to godhood. He believes that a Napoleon, a true genius, has the right not just to break old laws, but to create new ones, to be a source of a new morality for the rest of humanity. His terrible act is an experiment to see if he is one of these new gods, a man capable of stepping over the old morality without flinching. But Raskolnikov's experiment is a catastrophic failure. He succeeds in the physical act, but he is immediately crushed by the psychological consequences, his own human nature, his conscience, his capacity for empathy and love. The very things his theory dismissed as weaknesses of the ordinary man rise up and declare war on him. He discovers that it is not so easy to kill the God within, the innate sense of a higher moral law. He cannot bear the weight of his own terrible freedom, and he collapses, not a man-god, but a sick, tormented, and profoundly human being. His journey shows that the first attempt to seize divinity through an act of will leads only to self-destruction. It is in his later, darker novel, The Possessed, that Dostoevsky explores this idea to its most terrifying and logical conclusion. He does this through the character of Alexei Kirillov, a brilliant, gentle, and utterly insane engineer. Kirillov is not a criminal like Raskolnikov. He is a pure philosopher, a saint of atheism, who has taken the problem of God's absence and followed it to its ultimate, chilling end. His logic is a terrifyingly simple syllogism that forms the very heart of the man-God concept. First, he reasons, God is necessary for human existence. Throughout all of history, the idea of God is what has kept man from ending his own existence in the face of suffering and death. Therefore, God must exist. But then comes the second premise, he says, I know that he does not exist and cannot exist. This is the great tragic contradiction of the modern world. The need for God clashing with the intellectual impossibility of believing in him, and from this contradiction, Kirillov draws his final earth-shattering conclusion. If there is no God, then I am God. This is the birth of the man-God for Kirillov. This is not a metaphor, it is a literal truth. If there is no external divine will to give meaning to the universe, then all will becomes human will, and the man who can fully realize and express this absolute freedom will himself become the new God. He believes that all of history has been waiting for this moment, for a single man to shatter the old illusion of a heavenly God, and in doing so, to liberate all of humanity. He believes that he is that man, the savior of a godless world. He must become the first man-God to show all the other lice that they too can be gods. But how can he prove it? How can he perform an act so absolute, so definitive, that it will shatter the old world and usher in the new? He decides that there is only one way. He must perform the ultimate act of self-will, the one act that demonstrates complete and utter freedom from all external laws, including the most powerful one of all, the fear of death. He must end his own existence. Not out of despair, not out of sadness, but as a triumphant, logical, and final statement of his own divinity. It is an act of ultimate rebellion against a meaningless universe, an assertion of the supremacy of the human will over the nothingness of eternity. He believes that this single, final act will transform the world. It will be a form of gospel, a good news for the modern age, by showing that a man can conquer the fear of death through an act of his own will. He will liberate everyone else from that same fear. Humanity will be physically and spiritually transformed. They will cast off their old superstitious beliefs and their fear of suffering, and they will all become man-gods, living in a state of pure, joyful, and absolute freedom right here on earth. It is a strange, paradoxical, and deeply Russian vision of salvation, a heaven on earth, to be purchased by a single definitive act of self-destruction. Kirillov's quest is a sincere, if terrifying, philosophical one. But Dostoevsky shows how this profound idea is immediately perverted when it falls into the hands of a lesser man, Kirillov's fellow revolutionary. The cynical and manipulative Pyotr Verkovensky sees the man-god idea not as a path to spiritual liberation, but as a powerful political tool. He does not care about transforming humanity. He cares about controlling it. He sees Kirillov's final act as the perfect founding myth for his own revolutionary cell, a dark sacrament that will bind his followers together through shared blood and terror. Pyotr represents the political consequence of Kirillov's philosophy, the terrifying reality of what happens when the idea of the man-god is used to justify totalitarian control. He wants to tear down the old world, not to liberate humanity, but to enslave it under his own rule. He is the petty, spiteful demon who takes the grand, tragic ambition of the man-god and turns it into a simple, brutal justification for mass manipulation and political violence, showing how the noblest, most abstract ideas can become monstrous when they are put into practice by men who hunger only for power. This theme of the man-god echoes throughout Dostoevsky's work. It is the intellectual torment that drives Ivan Karamazov to his own form of madness. The belief that if there is no God and no immortality, then a clever man is free to live entirely for his own pleasure. It is the dark, seductive whisper that promises freedom but delivers only chaos and despair. Dostoevsky saw this impulse to deify humanity, to build a perfect world on the foundation of human reason alone, as the great central heresy of the modern age, the source of the nihilism and revolutionary violence that he believed would one day drown the world in blood. The attempt to become a god in Dostoevsky's universe always and inevitably leads to ruin. It leads to the psychological collapse of a man like Raskolnikov, who discovers he is still tragically human. It leads to the paradoxical, self-annihilating logic of a man like Kirillov, who must destroy himself to prove his own divinity. Or worst of all, it leads to the monstrous, cynical tyranny of a man like Pyotr Verkovensky, who uses the dream of a new humanity to justify the enslavement of all. The throne of God, Dostoevsky shows us, is a seat that is not meant for man, and the attempt to seize it is the ultimate act of pride, a transgression that leads not to a new heaven, but to a very old and very human hell. From the ashes of a dead god rises Dostoevsky's central, most terrifying and most persistent theme, the problem of human freedom. For Dostoevsky, freedom is not the glorious, liberating force celebrated in political speeches and revolutionary anthems. It is a profound, crushing, and almost unbearable metaphysical burden. It is the terrible gift that is given to humanity in a world where the old certainties of divine law have turned to dust, leaving mankind standing alone and untethered in a silent, indifferent universe. The logic is simple and inescapable. If there is no God, if there is no immortal soul, then there can be no absolute, external, and eternal source for morality. Good and evil cease to be cosmic truths and become, instead, simple human conventions, temporary agreements made for the sake of social order. And if morality is just a man-made invention, then a clever and powerful man is free to invent his own. This is the horrifying question that echoes through all of Dostoevsky's great novels, a question most famously formulated by the brilliant and tormented Ivan Karamazov. If God does not exist, everything is permitted. It is crucial to understand that this is not a cry of joyful liberation. It is a statement of profound horror. It is the realization that in a world without limits, without a sacred compass to guide us, we are lost. The weight of absolute freedom, the responsibility of creating our own meaning and our own values from scratch, is a burden too great for the human soul to bear. We are, Dostoevsky believes, creatures who crave rules, who long for certainty, who desperately need to believe that our choices matter in some grand cosmic sense, and a world where everything is permitted is a world where ultimately nothing matters at all. This paralysis in the face of infinite choice is the very sickness of the underground man. He is a creature of absolute freedom, unbound by any external code of honor or belief, and the result is that he can do nothing. He is so free that he is trapped, unable to commit to any single course of action, because he is excruciatingly aware of every other possibility. His freedom is not a source of power, but a source of impotence, a spiritual inertia that leaves him stewing in the resentful misery of his own squalid corner, a perfect portrait of a soul crushed by its own unbound liberty. This idea finds its ultimate expression in Ivan Karamazov's great parable, the story of the Grand Inquisitor. The Inquisitor, an old, powerful cardinal during the Spanish Inquisition, confronts Jesus Christ, who has returned to earth, and he condemns him. He tells Christ that his greatest mistake was giving humanity the terrible gift of free will. He says that for 15 centuries the Church has been working to correct this error, to undo the damage of Christ's terrible gift, because, the Inquisitor argues, humanity does not want to be free. People do not want the agonizing burden of choosing between good and evil, he says. They want bread, they want security, they want miracle, mystery and authority. They crave someone to worship, someone to hand their conscience over to, someone who will tell them how to live. The Grand Inquisitor and his church have taken away humanity's freedom, and in exchange they have given them happiness. The happiness of a well-fed, obedient, and untroubled flock of sheep. He has freed them from freedom itself, and he argues that this is the ultimate act of love for a weak and pathetic species that can't handle the burden Christ laid upon it. Raskolnikov's crime is a direct and violent rebellion against this very idea. He is a man who refuses to be a part of the common flock. He believes he is one of the few who can bear the weight of absolute freedom. His transgression is an attempt to prove that he is an extraordinary man, a man for whom everything is permitted. He tries to seize this terrible freedom by an act of will. To write his own moral law in the blood of another, he attempts to become his own Grand Inquisitor, the sole arbiter of his own actions. But his experiment fails, because he discovers that even if God is silent in the heavens, the idea of a moral law, the echo of God, is alive and screaming within his own soul. His conscience, his capacity for love, his physical sickness, all of it is a rebellion of his own human nature against the terrible freedom he has tried to claim. He learns that he cannot permit himself everything, because he is not free from his own humanity. He is not free from the innate, inescapable need for a moral compass. His punishment is the slow, agonizing realization that he is not, and never can be, a god. If Raskolnikov is the man who fails to live as if everything is permitted, then Nikolai Stavrogin from The Possessed is the man who tragically, horrifyingly succeeds. He is a man of immense intelligence, charisma, and will, who truly attempts to live in a world without any moral boundaries whatsoever. He commits acts of shocking, senseless cruelty, but he also performs acts of strange, almost saintly goodness. He marries a crippled, half-mad woman out of a sense of ironic pity. He endures a public slap without flinching. He does it all to test the limits, to see if any action can make him feel something, anything. The result of his absolute freedom is not a feeling of power, but a complete and total spiritual death. By erasing the line between good and evil, he has erased all meaning from his life. Beauty and ugliness, cruelty and kindness, they all become the same to him. Just different, equally boring sensations. His great transgression leads him not to a throne, but to a state of profound, soul-crushing ennui, a spiritual void so absolute that the only act of will he has left is the final, pathetic act of taking his own life. He is the ultimate proof that a world where everything is permitted is a world where nothing has any value, including life itself. This leads us to Dostoevsky's central, profound paradox about the nature of true freedom. He suggests that the nihilist's freedom, the freedom to do whatever you want, is a false freedom. It is actually a form of slavery. A slavery to one's own whims, appetites, and chaotic impulses. A man like Stavrogin is not free. He is a prisoner of his own emptiness. A ghost blown about by the winds of his own caprice. True freedom, Dostoevsky argues, is found not in the rejection of all limits, but in the voluntary acceptance of a higher moral law. True freedom is the ability to choose, against all your own selfish, prideful, and fearful instincts, to follow the path of Christ, to accept your cross, to serve something greater than your own ego. It is the freedom that Sonia Marmelovna possesses, Though she is a social slave, she is spiritually free because she has chosen to sacrifice herself for others. It is the freedom that the elder Zosima preaches, the freedom that comes from loving all of creation. This, for Dostoevsky, is the ultimate act of a free will, not to declare that everything is permitted, but to choose, freely and with love, to live as if everything is sacred. And so, the terrifying question that hangs over Dostoevsky's world is not an invitation to nihilism, but a profound and desperate warning. The freedom offered by a godless world is a mirage, an illusion that leads only to the paralysis of the underground man, the psychological collapse of Raskolnikov, or the spiritual suicide of Stavrogin. It is a burden that humanity cannot bear, a gift so terrible that we will beg a Grand Inquisitor to take it away from us. The choice he leaves us with is a stark one: either the false freedom of a world where everything is permitted and nothing matters, or the difficult, paradoxical, and truly human freedom of a world where every soul is sacred and all are responsible for all. Having established a world where the absence of God leads to the terrible freedom where everything is permitted, Dostoevsky now presents his most powerful counterargument, a challenge so profound and so emotionally devastating that it has shaken the foundations of religious faith for over a century. This is not the argument of a simple atheist, but of a tormented believer, a man who is willing to accept God, but who cannot, under any circumstances, accept his world. This is the great rebellion of Ivan Karamazov, brilliant, intellectual, and deeply tormented brother who lays out his case in a dusty provincial tavern to his younger brother, the devout and pure-hearted monk, Alyosha. Ivan begins his great confession not by denying God's existence, but by sidestepping the question entirely. With a strange, almost humble acceptance, he tells Alyosha that his small, earthly, Euclidean mind cannot possibly comprehend the infinite, and so he is willing to accept the possibility of God's existence. He is even willing to accept the idea of a divine wisdom and a final, cosmic purpose. This is what makes his argument so devastating. He is not attacking God from the outside, from a position of atheism. He is attacking God's creation from the inside, from a position of shared moral outrage. "It is not God that I do not accept," he says, his voice low and intense. "It is this world of gods that I do not accept and cannot agree to accept." He explains that he can, perhaps, understand the suffering of adults, for adults have eaten the apple. They know the difference between good and evil, and their suffering is the price of that knowledge, the price of their freedom. It is a concept he finds difficult, but not impossible to grasp. But his rebellion, his entire case against creation, is not built on the suffering of adults. It is built on the tears of those who have not yet eaten the apple. It is built on the unbearable, unforgivable, and utterly senseless suffering of innocent children. He tells Alyosha that he has been making a collection, a little library of facts, of newspaper clippings and stories that illustrate the particular, unique, and monstrous cruelty that human beings are capable of inflicting upon the innocent. He speaks of the Turks and their atrocities, of men who find a sensuous pleasure in the pain of others. He is a connoisseur of human cruelty, a man who has forced himself to look into the darkest corners of the human soul, and it is from this collection that he draws his evidence, the evidence he will use to put God himself on trial. He wants to speak only of the children, he says, because without them, his case would not be so conclusive. He begins to recount his stories, his voice a mask of cold, intellectual detachment that barely conceals a burning, furious rage. He speaks of a poor 5-year-old girl, abused and tormented by her own highly educated and respectable parents. They subjected the child to the most horrific and degrading punishments, leaving her to freeze in an outhouse at night. They did this, Ivan says, because they could, because the child was a powerless, helpless creature whose tears and terror they found amusing. This is the first exhibit in his case, a proof that the capacity for pure, senseless evil is not limited to savages, but exists in the very heart of so-called civilized society. Then he tells his most famous and most horrifying story, the story of the retired general, a wealthy landowner who kept a massive pack of hounds. One day, a small serf boy, no more than 8 years old, threw a stone in play and accidentally injured the paw of the general's favorite dog. For this trivial offense, the general flew into a rage. He had the boy locked up for the night, and the next morning he assembled all of his serfs, including the boy's own mother, to witness the punishment. The boy was stripped bare, and he was told to run, and then the general gave the order, "Set the dogs on him," and he unleashed the entire pack of hounds upon the small naked child who was torn to pieces before his mother's eyes. Ivan asks Alyosha, his voice trembling with a cold, suppressed fury, if the general should have been shot for this, he should be shot. Alyosha whispers, his face pale, his spirit crushed by the sheer, unimaginable horror of the story. Ivan has made his point. He has presented a case of suffering so absolute, so senseless, and so unforgivable that it seems to poison the very fabric of creation. He has shown that the world contains a darkness so profound that it defies all attempts at rational explanation or divine justification. What possible good, what possible purpose could be served by such an act? This is the foundation for his final, devastating conclusion. He addresses the common religious argument, the idea that all this suffering, all these unforgiven tears, are a necessary component of some future higher harmony, a paradise where all will be forgiven and all will make sense. Ivan rejects this justification utterly and completely, he declares, with the force of a man passing a final, irrevocable sentence, that no future harmony, no eternal bliss, no ultimate truth can possibly be worth the price of the suffering of that one small child torn apart by dogs. The cost is too high, the price of the ticket is an atrocity. And the final paradise, if it is built on such a foundation, is a place he could never accept. If the suffering of children goes to make up the sum of sufferings, which is necessary for the purchase of truth, he says, then I say beforehand that the entire truth is not worth such a price. It is a radical, breathtaking statement of moral rebellion. He is placing the immediate, concrete suffering of a single child above all the abstract future promises of theology, and then he delivers the line that has echoed through the conscience of the modern world. He says that if he is forced to accept this suffering as part of the price of admission to paradise, then I most respectfully return him the ticket. He then turns this abstract problem into a direct personal challenge to his devout brother. He asks Alyosha to imagine that he is the architect of human destiny, that he could build a perfect world of ultimate peace and happiness, but that to create this perfect world it was necessary and inevitable to torture to death just one tiny creature, that same little boy who injured the hound, and to found the entire edifice of happiness on his unavenged tears. Would you consent to be the architect on those conditions? Ivan asks, his eyes fixed on his brother's tormented face, and Alyosha, the embodiment of faith and love, whispers his reply, his voice barely audible, "No, I would not consent." The rebellion is complete. The intellectual has presented a moral case against God's world that the saint cannot refute. Faith itself, in the person of Alyosha, agrees that the price is too high. Ivan has demonstrated that the problem of evil, and specifically the suffering of the innocent, is an unhealable wound in the heart of creation, a flaw so profound that it calls into question the very goodness of God and the meaning of the entire cosmic project. Alyosha's only response is to weakly point to the figure of Christ, the one being who suffered innocently and therefore has the right to forgive all things. But for Ivan, this is not a sufficient answer. The problem is not about forgiveness, it is about justice, and there can be no justice in a world that allows for such horrors. He has proven, at least to himself, that even if there is a God, his creation is a moral failure, a project built on a foundation of unforgivable pain. This profound and agonizing impasse, this spiritual checkmate, is the foundation for Ivan's own personal descent into madness, and it sets the stage for his next, even more radical exploration of the problem, the great and terrible parable of the Grand Inquisitor. Having laid bare the moral problem of a world filled with unforgivable suffering, Ivan Karamazov does not rest his case. He pushes his rebellion to its final, most brilliant and chilling conclusion. He tells his devout brother Alyosha that he has composed a poem, a story set in the heart of the Spanish Inquisition in 16th century Seville, at a time when the fires of the auto da fe were burning heretics to the glory of God. It is into this world of absolute, unbending authority that a silent, mysterious visitor arrives. He appears quietly in the sun-scorched streets, walking among the people. He is not announced by trumpets. He performs his miracles with a gentle, almost shy grace. He touches the eyes of a blind man, who then sees. He calls forth a young girl from her coffin, and she rises. Restored to her weeping mother, the people, with an unerring instinct of the heart, recognize him immediately. They weep, they stretch out their hands to touch the hem of his garment. They adore him, for it is Christ, returned to his flock for a brief silent visit. But as this scene of love and reunion unfolds, a figure of immense and terrible authority appears. It is the Grand Inquisitor, an old man of 90, tall and erect, with a withered face and sunken eyes that still burn with a formidable inner fire. He sees the miracle, he sees the adoring crowd, and his face darkens. He understands everything. He raises his hand and orders his guards to seize the visitor, and the crowd, the very same people who were just moments ago kissing the feet of their Savior, parts in silent, terrified submission. Such is the power the old man holds over them. The scene shifts to a dark, vaulted prison cell in the sacred court. The Inquisitor is alone with his silent prisoner. And it is here that the old man's long, terrible, and strangely compassionate monologue begins. He tells Christ that he has no right to return, no right to add a single word to what has been said before. For 15 centuries, he says, the Church has been wrestling with the one terrible gift that Christ bestowed upon humanity, the one gift that has been the source of all its suffering, the gift of freedom. The old man's entire argument is a brilliant, blasphemous refutation of Christ's work, structured around the 3 temptations in the desert. He claims that in rejecting the temptations of the wise and dreadful spirit, Christ fundamentally misunderstood human nature and condemned mankind to an eternity of chaos and misery. The first temptation, he says, was the offer to turn stones into bread. Christ rejected this, offering instead the bread of heaven, but the Inquisitor calls this a catastrophic mistake, for what man can choose heavenly bread when his children are starving? He argues that humanity is weak, vicious, and rebellious, but that they will always in the end bow down to the one who gives them earthly bread. He accuses Christ of caring only for a small elite of strong souls who could handle freedom while abandoning the weak, numberless millions. The Inquisitor declares that his Church has corrected this error. They have taken away man's freedom, and in return they feed him. They give him earthly bread in Christ's name, and the flock is grateful, believing they are free, when in fact they have happily traded their liberty for security. The second temptation, the Inquisitor continues, was the offer of a miracle, the chance for Christ to prove his divinity beyond all doubt by throwing himself from the temple and being saved by angels. Christ rejected this, demanding free faith, not faith compelled by a miracle, but the old man insists, was another act of profound cruelty, for man does not crave free choice, he craves miracle, mystery, and authority. He wants to be awed, to be given a sacred object to worship, to have a clear, undeniable sign that tells him what to believe. The burden of a free and personal faith is too great for his weak spirit to bear. The Church, the Inquisitor says, has corrected this error as well. They have built their entire edifice on miracle, mystery, and authority. They give the people sacred relics, incomprehensible dogmas, and a rigid hierarchy to obey. They have taken the terrifying void of free faith and filled it with the comforting certainties of religious ritual. They have given the people what they truly want, not the freedom to doubt, but the comfort of a belief that requires no effort, a faith that is handed to them whole and complete, a mystery they can worship without understanding. The third and final temptation was the offer of power. The Spirit showed Christ all the kingdoms of the world and offered them to him, a chance to unite all of humanity under a single, universal banner, to end all wars and all division. Christ rejected this, but the Inquisitor declares that the Church accepted it. They took the sword of Caesar from Rome, and have spent centuries working to build a universal state, a common, concordant anthill, where all of humanity will be united, and finally, for the first time in history, happy. He paints a picture of this future, a world where billions of happy, childlike people live and die in simple, untroubled obedience. They will work, they will play, they will sin, but they will be allowed to sin, because the Church will take the burden of that sin upon itself. They will have no secrets from their leaders. They will be given a quiet, humble happiness, the happiness of weak creatures, and they will die peacefully, believing that their obedience has earned them a place in the heavenly kingdom. It is a vision of a perfect, stable, and completely managed society, a final, benevolent, and total enslavement of the human spirit. And who will manage this great anthill? Who will bear the terrible burden of knowledge and deception? The Inquisitor answers that it will be them, the few, the strong, the keepers of the mystery. He and his fellow churchmen, who have sided not with Christ, but with the wise and dreadful spirit, they have taken on the burden of humanity's freedom themselves. They alone will know the terrible truth. That there is no heaven, no eternal reward, they will suffer, bearing the curse of this knowledge, so that the billions of others can live out their lives in a state of blissful, ignorant happiness. He portrays himself not as a tyrant, but as a martyr, a tragic, compassionate figure, who has sacrificed his own soul for the good of the flock. He sees his work not as a betrayal of Christ, but as a profound and necessary act of love. A love based on a deep, sorrowful pity for the weakness of human nature. He has looked at humanity and seen not creatures made in God's image, but frightened children who need to be protected from the terrible, destructive gift of their own freedom. Throughout this entire passionate and devastating monologue, the prisoner has remained completely silent. He has not offered a single word in his own defense. When the old man finally falls silent, his words echoing in the dark cell, the prisoner simply approaches him, and with a quiet, infinite tenderness, he kisses the Inquisitor on his bloodless 90-year-old lips. It is a simple, silent act of pure, unconditional love and forgiveness. An answer that contains no argument, no logic, but holds more power than the Inquisitor's entire intricate philosophy. The old man is deeply, profoundly shaken. The kiss, he says, burns his heart. He shudders, goes to the door, and opens it. "Go," he tells his prisoner, his voice a hoarse whisper, "and come no more. Come not at all. Never, never." He releases Christ back into the dark, uncomprehending streets of the city, and the Inquisitor himself is left alone, to live with the burning memory of that silent, forgiving kiss, a kiss that has affirmed the very freedom he has spent his entire life trying to destroy. The parable is Ivan's final and most powerful statement of his rebellion. It is the ultimate expression of the conflict between the two great loves for humanity. The Inquisitor's love is based on pity, a desire to save man from suffering by taking away his freedom, but Christ's love is based on respect, a faith in man's ability to freely choose good, even at the cost of immense suffering. Dostoevsky lays the question open, but the power of that silent, loving kiss suggests that true love cannot exist without freedom, no matter how terrible and how beautiful that freedom might be. The great, agonizing questions raised by the underground man and Ivan Karamazov, the questions of freedom, of a dead God, and of a world where everything might be permitted, do not remain abstract philosophical problems in Dostoevsky's world. They bleed from the page into the squalid streets of Petersburg. They take root in the heart of a single, proud and desperate young man, and they blossom into a terrible and bloody experiment. This is the story of Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, the protagonist of Crime and Punishment, and Dostoevsky's first great exploration of what happens when a man decides to put these dangerous new ideas into practice. Raskolnikov is the intellectual heir to the underground, a man who has retreated from the world into the coffin of his tiny room to wrestle with his own theories, but unlike the underground man, who is paralyzed by his own hyper-consciousness, Raskolnikov is a man who yearns for action. He is tormented by the question Ivan Karamazov posed. If there is no divine law, what is to stop a man from creating his own? His entire being is consumed by the need to answer this question, not with words but with a single, definitive, and transgressive act. He decides he will become the author of his own moral law. His justification is laid out in an article he had written months earlier. A piece of brilliant, prideful, and terrifyingly logical philosophy. In it, he argues that all of humanity can be divided into two unequal and distinct categories: the ordinary and the extraordinary. The vast majority of mankind, he claims, belongs to the ordinary class. They are the material, the timid, conservative masses, whose purpose is simply to obey the laws of their time and to reproduce their own kind. They are, in his cold, contemptuous view, nothing more than a human herd that exists to maintain the present. But then there are the few, the rare, the extraordinary. These are the geniuses, the great men, the movers of history, who bring a new word to the world. Men like Lycurgus, Muhammad, and his ultimate idol Napoleon. These men, he argues, are not bound by the same laws as the ordinary masses. By virtue of their genius and their world-changing purpose, they possess an inner right to transgress. They have the right to step over any obstacle, to disregard any existing law, and even, he states explicitly, to step over blood if it is necessary for the fulfillment of their great idea. This is not just a theory of history for Raskolnikov, it is a deeply personal and urgent question. He is tormented by his own poverty, by the sacrifices of his mother and sister, and by his own perceived but as yet unproven intellectual greatness. He looks at himself and asks the question that is the engine of the entire novel: which one am I? Am I just another louse, destined to live and die in miserable obedience? Or am I a new Napoleon, an extraordinary man who has the right to take a life in pursuit of a higher purpose? His crime, therefore, is not a simple robbery. It is an experiment, a terrible, existential test to discover the true nature of his own soul. He reduces the profound moral question of taking a life to a cold, simple, and monstrously rational equation. He calls it the arithmetic of crime. He identifies his target, the old pawnbroker Alyona Ivanovna, and in his mind, he strips her of all her humanity. She is not a person. She is a principle, a vile, malicious parasite who grows rich on the suffering of others. Her existence, he calculates, is not just useless, it is actively harmful to the world, a negative value in the great ledger of humanity. He then completes the equation: her life, a negative, can be subtracted from the world, and her money, a positive, can be used to achieve 100 good deeds. It could save his mother from poverty, rescue his sister Dunya from her humiliating engagement to Luzhin, and most important, it could fund his own education, allowing him, a future genius, to launch a brilliant career where he could benefit all of mankind. 1 death and 100 lives in exchange, he reasons. Why? It's simple arithmetic. It is the ultimate expression of a purely utilitarian worldview, a philosophy that has no room for the sacred, inviolable nature of a human soul. But Dostoevsky's great psychological insight is to show that a human being cannot so easily transform himself into a creature of pure cold logic. A true Napoleon, Raskolnikov believes, would perform such an act without a moment's hesitation, without a flicker of doubt or disgust, but Raskolnikov is plagued by both his own body and his own conscience. Rebel against his theory, the thought of the act fills him with a profound physical revulsion. He is overcome by fever, by anxiety, by a deep instinctual horror at the very thing his intellect has deemed necessary and just. His humanity is at war with his ideas. The act itself is a catastrophic failure, a complete and utter betrayal of the clean, philosophical principles he had laid out. He is not a calm, resolute lawgiver. He is a clumsy, terrified, and pathetic amateur. He brings the wrong instrument. He fumbles with the locks. He is almost caught. His grand, Napoleonic transgression descends into a sordid, frantic, and deeply undignified scramble. The arrival of the innocent Lizaveta completely shatters his plan, forcing him into a second, spontaneous, and utterly unjustifiable act of violence. This second event has no theory behind it, no arithmetic to justify it. It is a pure, panicked, and brutal act of self-preservation. And in the aftermath, there is no feeling of triumph, no sense of having passed the great test. He does not feel like an extraordinary man. He feels like a terrified animal. He doesn't even properly secure the spoils of his great transgression. He grabs a few worthless trinkets, hides them under a stone, without ever looking at them, and forgets they even exist. This single detail proves the lie at the heart of his theory. The crime was never about the money. It was never about saving his mother or helping humanity. It was only, and ever, about him, about his own desperate, narcissistic need to prove that he was not a louse. His punishment is not external, but internal. It is not the police who hunt him, but his own soul. He is immediately afflicted with a burning fever, with delirium, with a profound sense of alienation that cuts him off from everyone he loves. He has, he says, not ended the life of the old woman, but his own. He has stepped over the line, but instead of finding himself in a new world of freedom and power, he finds himself in a cold, airless, and solitary hell of his own making. His body, his dreams, his very conscience, all rise up to declare that his theory was a monstrous lie. Raskolnikov's story is Dostoevsky's first great refutation of the man-God idea. It is a profound and deeply human exploration of the conflict between a prideful, rational intellect and the messy, irrational, but inescapable truths of the human heart. He shows us that a human life cannot be reduced to a number in an equation, that good and evil are not relative concepts to be redefined by a superior mind, but are profound, spiritual realities that are woven into the very fabric of our being. Raskolnikov tries to become a god, but is crushed by the simple, undeniable fact that he is still a man. His failed experiment is a warning, a demonstration that the path of everything is permitted leads not to liberation, but to a prison of guilt and isolation, far more terrible than any Siberian labor camp. He has tested the new, godless morality, and has found it to be a recipe for madness, a blueprint for the destruction of the soul. His journey from the conception of his crime to his final painful surrender will become the great, foundational story for all of Dostoevsky's future explorations into the terrible, real-world consequences of these dangerous and seductive new ideas. If Crime and Punishment is the story of a single soul infected by a dangerous idea, then Dostoevsky's next great novel, The Possessed, is the story of an entire society consumed by a plague. It is what happens when the isolated intellectual pride of a Raskolnikov escapes the laboratory of a single mind and spreads like a contagion through a whole generation. This novel is not just a psychological drama, it is a political thriller, a terrifying satire, and a chillingly accurate prophecy of the revolutionary violence that would convulse the world in the century to come. For the characters in this story are not possessed by supernatural spirits, they are possessed by something far more dangerous: ideas. The story is a tale of two generations, a portrait of the fathers, who played with fire, and the sons who were burned by it. The older generation is embodied by the deeply pathetic and yet strangely lovable Stepan Trofimovich Verkovensky. He is a man of the 1840s, a liberal idealist who has spent his entire life playing at being a profound, persecuted thinker. He spouts beautiful, borrowed phrases about liberty, the Sistine Madonna, and the universal good. But his ideas are just a game, an elegant and harmless pastime. He is a man who has raised a generation on a diet of abstract, progressive theories without ever understanding their real-world consequences. His son, Pyotr Stepanovich Verkovensky, is the horrifying result of this careless education. He is a man of the 1860s, a new man, a nihilist, and the novel's arch-villain. He has taken the abstract romantic liberalism of his father's generation and stripped it of all its beauty, all its sentiment, and all its humanity, leaving only a cold, cynical, and purely destructive will to power. He is not an idealist who believes in a future utopia. He is a pure revolutionary who believes in nothing but chaos. He sees the world as a rotten edifice that must be torn down to its foundations, not to build something better, but simply for the sheer, exhilarating pleasure of the demolition. Pyotr Stepanovich is a master manipulator, a political con man of the highest order, and he has assembled a small, secret revolutionary cell in their provincial town. But this is no noble band of freedom fighters. It is a pathetic, deeply insecure, and easily manipulated group of second-rate intellectuals, each one possessed by their own half-baked theory. They are the followers, the ordinary men who have been infected by the extraordinary ideas of their time. And Pyotr plays them like a virtuoso, flattering their vanity, exploiting their weaknesses, and binding them together in a web of secrets and shared resentment. The group's own philosopher, a grim and logical man named Shigaliov, provides the theoretical justification for their future tyranny. At one of their secret meetings, he unveils his great plan for the future of humanity. A system he calls Shigaliovism. His premise is a piece of terrifying, paradoxical logic. Starting from unlimited freedom, he declares, I arrive at unlimited despotism. It is the most chilling and concise summary of the totalitarian impulse ever written. A direct acknowledgement that the quest for a perfect free society will inevitably lead to the most absolute form of slavery. Shigaliov's plan is the Crystal Palace, but redesigned by a hangman. To achieve a state of perfect absolute equality, he argues, society must first be leveled. 90% of humanity must be stripped of all individuality, all property, all higher education, and all personal will. They will be reduced to a state of primitive innocence. A docile, obedient herd, happy in their simple, mindless equality. They will be the material, the foundation upon which the new world is built, a world of perfect, stable, and unquestioning servitude. And who will rule over this great human herd, the remaining 1/10 of humanity? The elite, the extraordinary, they alone will be free. They will have the right to do anything, to live as they please, answerable to no one. They will be the new gods, the man-gods, ruling over a planet of happy slaves. It is the Grand Inquisitor's vision. But stripped of all its religious justification, all its tragic compassion, leaving only the cold, brutal, and naked desire for absolute power. It is a perfect, logical, and utterly monstrous blueprint for the political horrors of the 20th century. Fyodor Verkovensky listens to this theory, not with horror, but with a gleeful, practical admiration. He sees it as the perfect tool for his own ambitions. But he knows that a system is not enough. A revolution needs a leader, a myth, a charismatic figurehead to inspire the masses, and he has chosen his candidate, the dark, enigmatic, and strangely charismatic nobleman, Nikolai Stavrogin. Stavrogin is the secret son around which all the other characters in the novel revolve. He is a man of immense strength and beauty. But he is a son that gives off no heat, a hollow man, a burnt-out case, who has already experimented with every possible transgression and has been left with only a profound and soul-crushing boredom. Pyotr's plan is to present Stavrogin to the world as a secret prince, a hidden leader, an Ivan the Tsarevich who will one day emerge to lead the great revolution. But Stavrogin is incapable of leading anyone. He cannot believe in Pyotr's petty, destructive cause. He cannot believe in anything at all. His spiritual emptiness is a black hole that threatens to swallow the entire revolutionary project. His story, which we will explore later, is the story of a man who has already seen the dead end of the path that the others are just beginning to walk. He is the ghost at their feast, a living testament to the ultimate futility of their nihilistic crusade. Without a willing leader, Pyotr must bind his pathetic little group together by other means. And he chooses the oldest and most effective tool of all, shared transgression. He engineers a situation where the group must eliminate one of its own members, a student named Shatov, who has renounced their ideas and is threatening to expose them. By forcing each member to participate in this terrible act, he makes them all complicit. He binds them together, not by loyalty, but by a shared, unforgivable guilt, a secret that makes them all slaves to him and to the cause. It is the practical application of the theory that everything is permitted, and the result is not liberation, but a descent into paranoia, fear, and mutual distrust. The novel culminates in a firestorm of chaos and violence. Driven by Pyotr's manipulations, the town is engulfed in literal fires. A great festival descends into a drunken, violent riot, and the atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion leads to a series of terrible, senseless events. Dostoevsky is showing us, in vivid, terrifying detail, that ideas are not just games, they are forces, powerful, elemental energies that, once unleashed upon the world, can burn it to the ground. The abstract theories cooked up in the minds of isolated intellectuals have become a concrete living hell for the ordinary people of the town. The Possessed is Dostoevsky's great and furious warning. He saw that the radical movements of his time, which spoke the language of liberation and equality, were in fact driven by a deep, nihilistic hatred for creation, a lust for destruction, and a profound, demonic pride. He prophesied, with an accuracy that still chills the blood, that the pursuit of a perfect man-made heaven on earth would lead not to a paradise, but to the concentration camps, the gulags, and the mass slaughters of the century to come. He showed us that when men become possessed by an idea, they cease to be human, and the world they create is not a crystal palace, it is a madhouse set ablaze. At the dark, silent center of the revolutionary storm that engulfs the world of the possessed stands its most enigmatic and chilling figure, Nikolai Stavrogin. He is the novel's absent son, a man of immense charm, intelligence, and physical power around whom all the other demonic characters revolve like frantic, desperate planets. He is the source of their ideas, the object of their fanatical devotion, and the secret, unspoken engine of their entire destructive project. He is the one who whispered the man-god theory to Kirillov, who planted the seed of chaotic revolution in Pyotr Verkovensky, and who inspired the slave nationalist faith of Shatov. He is an idea generator of unparalleled genius, yet he believes in none of his own ideas. He is a man of immense strength, but he possesses no will. He is capable of inspiring profound love and fanatical loyalty. But he is himself incapable of feeling anything at all. He is a portrait of a man who has pushed the boundaries of human experience so far that he has fallen off the other side into a state of complete and utter spiritual emptiness. He is Dostoevsky's ultimate exploration of a soul that has died long before the body has ceased to breathe. He is the walking, breathing, and devastatingly handsome corpse of a man who once tried to become a god. To understand this profound emptiness, we must turn to a chapter that Dostoevsky himself wrote, but which was censored from the original publication for being too shocking, too scandalous for the sensibilities of the 19th century. It is the key to his character, a document known as Stavrogin's Confession. In this lost chapter, Stavrogin, feeling the final, cold tendrils of his own damnation closing in, goes to a secluded monastery to see a saintly and deeply insightful monk named Tikhon. He brings with him a written confession, a document detailing his darkest secret, which he intends to publish to the whole world. The confession details a monstrous and unforgivable transgression committed years earlier, an ultimate sin against the very concept of innocence, the violation of a small, helpless child named Matryoshka. We must be clear, the true horror of the confession, the detail that Dostoevsky focuses on, is not the physical act itself, but the psychological state of the perpetrator. Stavrogin confesses that he did not commit this terrible act out of passion or rage or any recognizable human emotion. He did it out of a state of profound, soul-crushing boredom. It was an experiment in sensation, a desperate attempt to feel something, anything, in a world that had become a gray, monotonous wasteland to him. He was testing the limits. He wanted to see if there was any act so monstrous, so far beyond the pale of human decency, that it could finally make him feel alive. He wanted to know the farthest possible point of his own freedom, the ultimate expression of the idea that everything is permitted. He was, in essence, performing a laboratory experiment on his own soul, using the innocence of another as his raw material. This is the true, chilling horror of his character. His evil is not hot, but cold. It is a detached, curious, and utterly indifferent evil of a man for whom other human beings are no longer real. The aftermath of the event is what haunts him. The young girl, after the violation, did not cry or scream. She simply stood in the doorway, looking at him with a silent, feverish reproach, shaking her tiny, threatening fist at him. This image of her quiet, helpless, and yet somehow damning condemnation becomes a recurring phantom in his mind. Later, he learns, the child took her own life, unable to bear the weight of what had been done to her. This is the central, unforgivable fact of Stavrogin's existence. The memory that he cannot escape, not because of guilt, but because of its sheer, unforgettable ugliness. He brings this confession to the wise monk Tikhon, who reads the terrible document, and Tikhon's reaction is one of profound spiritual genius. He is horrified by the act. But he sees that the sin described in the document is not the true underlying sin that is destroying Stavrogin's soul. He looks past the transgression and sees its source, a pride so immense, so all-consuming, that it has eclipsed even the capacity for genuine repentance. Tikhon tells him that he is not truly sorry for his sin. He is simply horrified by his own ugliness, by the shallow aesthetic squalor of his own soul. The monk points out that Stavrogin's desire to publish this confession is not an act of humble penance, but an act of supreme, defiant arrogance. He wants to shock the world, to be seen as the greatest, most monstrous sinner of all time. He wants to challenge society to forgive the unforgivable. It is another, more subtle form of his desire to be extraordinary. He would rather be an infamous monster than an anonymous penitent. His desire for public shame, Tikhon understands, is just another form of vanity, another performance for a world he secretly holds in contempt. He is, in essence, in love with the grandeur of his own damnation. Tikhon offers him a true path to redemption, a path that is the complete opposite of Stavrogin's prideful plan. He advises him not to publish the confession, but to instead undertake a long, secret, and deeply humble journey of repentance. He suggests that he join a monastery, not as a famous sinner, but as a quiet, obedient novice, to spend years in prayer and simple labor, to slowly, painfully, and anonymously heal his soul, Away from the judgmental and admiring eyes of the world, he offers him the path of Sonia, the path of quiet suffering, and the acceptance of a hidden cross. But Stavrogin cannot accept this. His pride is too great. The thought of such a quiet, undramatic, and humble fate is more terrifying to him than any public condemnation. He needs an audience for his suffering. He needs his sin to be as grand and as monumental as his own self-image. He rejects Tikhon's counsel, choosing the public performance of the monster over the secret work of the saint. He leaves the monastery, having been offered his one and only chance at grace, and having turned his back on it, his final path is now set. Stavrogin is Dostoevsky's final and most devastating portrait of the failed man-god. He is the man who truly succeeded where Raskolnikov failed. His conscience did not break him, his will did not falter, he successfully silenced the voice of God within his own soul and lived as if everything was permitted. But the result was not power, it was not freedom, it was a complete and total spiritual death, a void, an emptiness so profound that he lost the very ability to distinguish between good and evil, between beauty and ugliness, and in doing so, all of life lost its meaning, its color, and its flavor. He is the chilling, tragic answer to Ivan Karamazov's rebellion. He is the man who has successfully returned the ticket to God and has been left with absolutely nothing in his hands. He is a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, a black hole of charisma that destroys everything and everyone he touches. His journey proves that the ultimate punishment for a man who chooses to believe in nothing is to himself become nothing, a hollow man, a dead soul, whose final and only remaining act of will is to erase the pointless fact of his own existence from the world. In his final, monumental novel, The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky takes all the great themes he has been wrestling with his entire life, the death of God, the burden of freedom, the nature of evil, and the possibility of redemption, and stages them within the chaotic, passionate, and deeply dysfunctional world of a single family. The Karamazovs are not just a family, they are a microcosm of all humanity, a living embodiment of Russia itself, a chaotic and contradictory mix of the highest spiritual striving and the lowest, most sensual degradation. Their story is Dostoevsky's final and most profound statement on the nature of sin. At the head of this family, or rather at its rotten core, is the father, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. He is not a tragic figure, he is a buffoon, a lecher, a greedy and neglectful parent, who has lived his entire life for the gratification of his own base appetites. He is a man who has forgotten all his duties to his children, to his society, and to his God. He represents the old, sinful world, a world without spiritual discipline, a world drowning in a Karamazov sensuality that is both joyful and deeply destructive. His very existence is a spiritual vacuum, a moral void, into which his sons are tragically and inevitably drawn. His three legitimate sons are a perfect map of the divided human soul. They are the warring factions of a single human consciousness. The eldest, Dmitri or Mitya, is the man of the heart, a passionate, chaotic, and deeply sensual creature who lives his life in a whirlwind of extreme emotion. He is capable of both noble, honorable impulses and the most degrading jealousy and rage. He is the embodiment of the raw, untamed force of human passion. The second son, Ivan, is the man of the mind. The brilliant, European-educated intellectual, the rationalist who has reasoned his way to the terrifying conclusion that everything is permitted. He is a man tormented by his own powerful, godless logic. And the youngest, Alexei, or Alyosha, is the man of the spirit. He is a novice in the local monastery, a follower of the saintly elder Zosima, and a creature of pure, simple, and active faith. He represents the spiritual potential that lies dormant in the Karamazov soul, a potential for love, for grace, and for redemption. And then there is the fourth, illegitimate son, Pavel Smerdyakov. The servant, the epileptic, a resentful, cunning, and deeply intelligent man who has been listening to Ivan's philosophical rebellions and has taken them not as an intellectual game, but as a practical, literal instruction manual. The central event of this sprawling novel is the ultimate transgression, the oldest and most terrible of sins. The act of patricide. The father, Fyodor Pavlovich, is ended in a brutal and mysterious fashion, and the evidence, both circumstantial and emotional, points overwhelmingly to one man, the passionate, violent, and desperate Dmitri, who had both the motive, a bitter dispute over an inheritance, and a woman, and the temperament to commit such an act. He is arrested, he is put on trial, and the great drama of the novel revolves around the question of his guilt or innocence. But this is Dostoevsky, and the question of who did it is far less important than the much deeper, more profound question of who is truly guilty. For Dostoevsky uses this single terrible act to illustrate his most cherished and most challenging spiritual idea, the idea that all are responsible for all. In the Karamazov world, there are no isolated acts. There are no individual sins. The transgression against the Father is not the work of a single man. It is a collective sin, a spiritual sickness that has infected the entire family, and every single son in his own way is profoundly and inescapably guilty. Dmitri, though he may be innocent of the final, physical act, is guilty in his heart. He hated his father. He publicly threatened him. He wished for his end with every fiber of his passionate being. He went to his father's house that night with the intent to do harm. His hands were not on the final instrument, but his soul was filled with a dark and transgressive desire. And in the spiritual courtroom of Dostoevsky's universe, the desire for the sin is a sin in itself. He is guilty of the intention, even if not the action. Ivan's guilt is perhaps the most profound and the most modern. He is guilty in his intellect, his philosophy. His cold, rational declaration that everything is permitted was the spiritual weapon that was placed in the hands of the actual perpetrator. His twisted disciple, Smerdyakov, acted as his faithful hound, putting Ivan's abstract, intellectual rebellion into brutal, concrete practice. Ivan never wished for the event in his heart, but he sanctioned it with his mind. He is the true author of the crime, the intellectual architect of the transgression, and his punishment is the horrifying realization that his ideas have consequences, a realization that drives him into a state of brain fever and madness. Even the saintly Alyosha, the novel's hero, feels his own share of the guilt. He feels that he abandoned his brothers in their moments of greatest need, that he retreated into the safety of his monastery when he should have been in the world practicing the active love that his elder Zosima preached. He feels that he could have done more, said more, loved more, and that his failure of action contributed to the final tragic outcome. His guilt is the guilt of the righteous, the sorrowful understanding that no one is ever truly innocent, that we are all implicated in the sins of our brothers. And then there is Smerdyakov, the practical nihilist. He is not a tormented intellectual like Ivan. He is a man who took a philosophical idea and used it as a simple license to get what he wanted. He is the terrifying, logical endpoint of a philosophy that has been stripped of all conscience. He is the hands of the crime, just as Ivan was the head. His final sneering confession to Ivan and his subsequent decision to remove himself from the world is the ultimate testament to the spiritual bankruptcy of a life lived as if everything is permitted. It leads only to a dead end of resentful, empty despair. The Karamazov sin, therefore, is not a single act, but a collective spiritual failure. It is the sin of a world where a father has abandoned his duties, where one son has surrendered to his passions, where another has elevated his intellect above his conscience, and where a third has not loved enough. The novel completely destroys the idea of the isolated, individual transgressor, the extraordinary man, acting alone, and replaces it with a profound and deeply unsettling vision of humanity as a single interconnected organism, a body in which the sickness of one member is the sickness of all. This powerful idea, that we are all mysteriously and inextricably bound together in a web of shared responsibility, is the dark foundation upon which Dostoevsky will build his final and most luminous vision of grace. For if it is true that all are responsible for the sins of all, then it must also be true that the love of one, the sacrifice of one, the faith of one can also, somehow, contribute to the salvation of all. The shared guilt of the Karamazov brothers is the necessary prelude to the shared redemption that Alyosha will come to represent, a redemption that is not found in proud, isolated theories, but in the humble, difficult, and deeply human act of accepting our role as our brother's keeper. After descending into the dark abyss of the nihilist soul, after exploring the monstrous consequences of a world where everything is permitted, Dostoevsky turned his art to its most difficult and ambitious challenge. He set out, in his own words, to portray a positively beautiful man, to create a character who could serve as a living answer to the cynical rebellions of his own great sinners. What would happen, he asked, if a truly Christ-like figure, a soul of absolute compassion and perfect humility, were to appear in the midst of our corrupt, passionate, and deeply cynical modern world. The result of this great experiment is the novel The Idiot, and its unforgettable protagonist, Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin. The prince arrives in St. Petersburg like a figure from another world. He is returning to Russia after years in a Swiss sanatorium, where he was treated for epilepsy in a condition the world calls idiocy. But his idiocy is not a lack of intelligence, it is a profound, almost supernatural innocence. He is utterly without ego, guile, or worldly ambition. He is candid to a fault. He takes everything people say at face value, and he possesses a boundless, almost shocking capacity for compassion and forgiveness. He is the complete and total antithesis of the proud, intellectual, and self-tormented men we have met before. He is, in every sense, Dostoevsky's attempt to write a modern Christ, and he is immediately thrown into the heart of the fallen world, into the drawing rooms of St. Petersburg society. A world of money, status, jealousy, and intricate social games. The people he meets do not know what to make of him. They are intrigued by his ancient princely title, but are baffled and often scornful of his childlike simplicity, his lack of worldly knowledge, and his complete inability to take offense. They call him an idiot to his face, and he agrees with them, with a gentle, untroubled smile. Yet, despite their mockery, they are all inexplicably drawn to him. His profound innocence acts as a kind of moral mirror. His simple, honest questions cut through their social masks, exposing their own hypocrisy, vanity, and secret sorrows without ever judging them. He sees the suffering child that lurks beneath the surface of every cynical adult he meets, and he speaks to that child. His goodness is not a theory, it is an active, disarming, and deeply unsettling force. He is a walk-breathing embodiment of the Christian ideal in a world that has forgotten what that ideal even looks like. The prince's beautiful soul is immediately caught in the gravitational pull of two powerful and contradictory women, who come to represent the two faces of the fallen world he has entered. The first is Nastasia Filipovna, one of Dostoevsky's most magnificent and tragic creations. She is a woman of breathtaking beauty and fierce intelligence. But she is a fallen woman, a soul that has been deeply wounded and shamed in her youth by her wealthy guardian, who treated her as his personal property. She is a creature of proud, hysterical, and self-destructive passion, a woman who despises herself and is determined to make the world pay for her own humiliation. The second woman is Aglaya Ivanovna Epanchina, the beautiful, intelligent, and capricious youngest daughter of a wealthy general. She is the opposite of Nastasia, a creature of light, of innocence, and of a proud, almost childish, purity. She represents the best of the conventional, respectable world. But her innocence is also intertwined with a deep, aristocratic pride, a vanity, and a fear of what other people might think. She is a good soul, but she is still a creature of this world, bound by its rules and its judgments, and it is between these two powerful forces, the shamed beauty and the proud beauty, that Prince Mishkin's own tragedy will unfold. His love for these two women is the central conflict of the novel, and it reveals the terrible paradox of his own perfect goodness. His love for Aglaya is a human love, a bright, joyful, and romantic affection for a fellow soul of light. He sees in her the promise of a happy, normal life, a life of simple, earthly love. But his love for Nastasia is a different, more divine, and ultimately more destructive force. It is a love of pure, boundless, and unconditional pity, a love that a shepherd feels for a lost and wounded sheep. He does not desire her, he desires to save her, to heal the terrible wound at the center of her being with his own compassion. This is the great and tragic dilemma, in a world of ego, of passion, and of possessive human love. The prince's divine, selfless compassion is a force that no one can understand. His inability to renounce his pity for the fallen Nastasia is seen by the proud Aglaya as a betrayal of their own romantic love. He is torn, not between two desires, but between two different kinds of love, the human and the divine. And in his attempt to be a savior to one and a husband to the other, he inadvertently brings about the ruin of both. His perfect, all-embracing goodness, when it collides with the imperfect, selfish nature of human passion, creates not harmony, but catastrophe. This conflict is mirrored in his relationship with his dark double, the merchant Parfeon Rogojin. Rogozhin is a man of pure earthly and violent passion. He is obsessed with Nastasia, not with a desire to save her, but with a dark, burning desire to possess her. He is the embodiment of the raw, untamed sensuality that Mishkin completely lacks. Yet instead of being simple enemies, they are bound together in a strange, almost mystical brotherhood. They exchange crosses, a symbolic act that makes them brothers in Christ, forever linked by their shared burden, their shared and ultimately fatal love for the same tormented woman. The novel builds to its inevitable, tragic conclusion. Nastya Filipovna, a soul perpetually torn between the sacred love of the prince and the profane passion of Rogozhin, between her own desire for redemption and her belief that she is unworthy of it, flees from the altar on her wedding day to Mishkin and runs away with Rogozhin. It is her final, self-destructive act, a choice to embrace the darkness that she believes is her true home. Rogozhin, driven mad by his obsessive love and her constant vacillation in a final terrible act of possession, brings her tormented life to an end. The final scene is one of the most haunting in all of literature. Prince Mishkin goes to Rogozhin's dark, gloomy house and finds him there, in a state of feverish delirium, sitting beside the bed where the body of Nastasia lies, covered by a white sheet. There is no anger, no accusation, no talk of justice. The prince's heart simply breaks. He sees not a monster, but a fellow sufferer, a brother whose soul has been shattered by a love too powerful for him to contain. And in a final, profound act of Christ-like empathy, he sits with the man who ended the life of the woman he loved, stroking his hair, comforting him as he descends into madness. This final, terrible shock, the collision with a passion and a darkness so absolute, is too much for the prince's own fragile mind to bear. His consciousness, which had been so miraculously restored, shatters completely. He is returned to the Swiss sanatorium, his mind a blank slate, a true idiot once more. His light extinguished by the very darkness he had tried to illuminate. Dostoevsky's great experiment thus ends in tragedy. It suggests that a soul of perfect absolute goodness cannot survive the fallen world of human passions. His compassion, instead of saving everyone, acts as a catalyst that drives them towards their own tragic destinies, and he himself is broken by the wreckage. A beautiful, luminous, and ultimately failed savior. The tragic experiment of Prince Mishkin left a profound and troubling question hanging over Dostoevsky's world. If a soul of perfect, passive, and Christ-like compassion is ultimately broken by the world, then what hope is there? Is goodness itself simply too fragile to survive the passionate, selfish, and brutal reality of human existence? Dostoevsky's answer to this question, his most complete and powerful vision of a viable Christian faith, comes in his final masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov, and it is embodied in the figure of the elder Zosima. Zosima is the spiritual heart of the novel, the wise and beloved mentor to the youngest Karamazov brother, Alyosha. He is not another worldly, ethereal creature like Prince Mishkin. He is a man whose goodness is not a product of innocence, but of experience. He has lived in the world, he has known sin, he has been a soldier, he has fought duels, and his profound faith is something he has earned through a long and difficult journey. His sainthood is not a fragile, glass-like purity, but a tough, resilient, and deeply human wisdom. His teachings, which form the spiritual core of the novel, are a direct and powerful response to the intellectual rebellion of Ivan Karamazov. Ivan, the brilliant theorist, stands in his study and loves all of humanity in the abstract. But he cannot accept the messy, ugly, and often cruel reality of individual human beings. His love is a love in dreams, a love for an idea, and it leads him to reject God's entire creation as a moral failure. Zosima offers a different path, a path he calls active love. Active love, Zosima teaches, is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to the easy, gratifying love one feels in dreams. To love humanity in the abstract is simple, but to love your actual individual neighbor, the flawed, irritating, and often unlovable person right in front of you, is a difficult and constant labor. It is not a feeling, it is a practice, a daily, hourly commitment to acts of compassion, of patience, of forgiveness. It is the practical work of healing the world, one small concrete gesture at a time. This philosophy is built upon a second, even more radical idea. the profound and mystical belief that all of humanity is a single interconnected organism. All is like an ocean, Zosima teaches, all is flowing and blending. A touch in one place sets up a movement at the other end of the world. This means that there are no isolated acts, no individual sins. Every action, every thought, every prayer sends ripples throughout the entire body of humanity, and this leads to his most challenging and most beautiful conclusion, that all are responsible for all. This is not a burden of guilt, but a radical call to empathy. If you are responsible for the sins of your neighbor, you cannot possibly judge him. You can only feel compassion for him. You can only see his sin as your own failure, a failure of your own love. This idea completely demolishes the proud, isolated individualism of the nihilist. The Raskolnikovs and Siberians of the world believe they stand alone, above humanity. But Zosima teaches that no one is alone, that we are all inextricably bound together in a web of shared sin and shared grace. This vision of interconnectedness also informs his profound and deeply psychological definition of hell. Hell, he explains, is not a place of fire and pitchforks. It is a spiritual state, the state of being no longer able to love. It is the ultimate isolation, a soul that has so completely embraced its own pride and its own ego that it has cut itself off from all connection to God, to others, and to the living, breathing world of creation. It is a torment that is not inflicted from the outside, but is chosen freely and tragically from within. It is, in short, the final, eternal destination of a man like Smerdyakov. To illustrate his teachings, Zosima recounts a story from his own past, a story of a mysterious visitor, a respected and philanthropic gentleman, who began to visit him for spiritual conversation. This man was a pillar of his community, admired by all, but he was secretly tormented, and one day he confessed to Zosima that years ago, in a fit of jealous passion, he had ended the life of the woman he loved, and had allowed another innocent man to be suspected of the crime. He had lived for 14 years with this terrible, hidden secret. His public acts of charity a desperate, failed attempt to atone for his private sin. The man is in agony. He wants to confess publicly, but he is terrified of the shame, of the destruction of his family, of the ruin of his good name. Zosima listens, and his advice is the perfect embodiment of his philosophy. He does not offer a simple, easy absolution. Instead, he guides the man, gently and with great love, towards the only path that can truly heal his soul, the path of public repentance, the path of accepting his suffering, of telling the truth and accepting the consequences, not as a legal requirement, but as a necessary act of spiritual healing. The mysterious visitor eventually follows this advice. He hosts a grand party, and at its height, he confesses his terrible secret to all his friends and family. The result is not what he feared. He is not universally condemned. Instead, his public act of humility, his willingness to accept his cross, has a profound and transformative effect on the community. He falls ill with a brain fever shortly after, and soon passes away, but he passes away in a state of peace, his soul finally unburdened, his final act on earth, a testament to the liberating power of truth. This story is the key to understanding Zosima's wisdom. His faith is not a collection of abstract dogmas, it is a practical, lived reality, a truth he has witnessed in the crucible of other human souls. His answer to Ivan's rebellion is not a logical refutation, it is a different way of being. He does not try to solve the problem of suffering, he shows how to live a meaningful life in the midst of it. His is a profoundly earthly faith, a faith that is rooted in the soil, in the community, and in the difficult, day-to-day labor of loving your flawed and difficult neighbor. He teaches Alyosha that the path to God is not through an escape from the world, but through a deeper, more profound engagement with it. He instructs him to leave the monastery after his passing, to go out into the world and be a monk among men, to take the lessons of active love, of shared responsibility, and of humble compassion, and to practice them in the messy, chaotic, and deeply sinful world of his own family, his own community, his own nation. Zosima's final answer, then, is not a theory, it is an action, a lifelong commitment to a love that is not a dream, but a harsh, dreadful, and ultimately beautiful labor. If the elder Zosima provides the wise, articulate, and deeply philosophical answer to the spiritual crisis of the modern world, then Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladova, or Sonia, is that answer made flesh. She is the silent, living, and breathing embodiment of Dostoevsky's most cherished ideals, a character so paradoxical and so powerful that she stands as a quiet rebuke to all the proud, intellectual, and self-tormented men who populate his novels. She is Dostoevsky's great and unforgettable portrait of the unlikely saint, the holy fool, the soul whose profound spiritual beauty shines brightest in the midst of the most abject worldly degradation. On the surface, Sonia's the lowest of the low. A young girl forced into prostitution by her family's destitution. She is timid, poorly educated, and lives in a state of constant public shame, a pariah in a society that both uses and despises her. She is by all worldly measures a lost and broken creature. Yet it is precisely this worldly brokenness that is the source of her immense spiritual strength. She has been stripped of everything, of her honor, of her social standing, of her pride, and in this state of profound emptiness, she has found room for a faith that is absolute, unconditional, and unshakable. She is the direct and complete antithesis of Raskolnikov. He is the man of pride. She is the woman of humility. He is the man of reason. She is the woman of faith. He attempts to save the world, or at least himself, through a grand, arrogant, and violent intellectual theory. She responds to the suffering around her with a simple, direct, and selfless compassion that requires no theory at all. Raskolnikov, in his intellectual arrogance, is drawn to her almost against his will. He despises her meekness, her holy fool quality, yet he recognizes in her a strange and powerful truth, a quiet authority that his own brilliant, raging mind cannot comprehend. He goes to her again and again, not to lecture, but unconsciously, to learn. He is a man dying of a spiritual thirst, and he senses that she, this shamed and silent girl, is the only one who possesses a source of living water. Her very existence is a refutation of his worldview. His theory dictates that the strong should rule the weak, that the lice should be swept aside, but Sonia, the weakest and most powerless of all, possesses a strength that makes his own Napoleonic ambitions seem like a pathetic, childish game. She doesn't just endure her suffering, she accepts it as her cross, a burden she must carry with a sorrowful but unwavering humility. This is the very heart of her spiritual power. For Dostoevsky, the ultimate sin is pride, the belief that one's own intellect, one's own will, is the supreme authority in the universe. Sonia is a creature entirely devoid of this pride. She has been so thoroughly humiliated by life that there is no room for ego left in her soul, and because of this, she has become a perfect vessel for a divine, selfless, and unconditional love. A love that the Orthodox tradition calls kenotic, the self-emptying love that Christ showed on the cross. She has emptied herself of her own needs, her own desires, her own honor, all for the sake of the suffering family that depends on her. We see the true nature of her faith during the pivotal scene where Raskolnikov commands her to read the story of the raising of Lazarus. This is not just a random Bible story, it is the ultimate test of her belief against his nihilism. He, Raskolnikov, is Lazarus, a man who has been spiritually dead for days, a soul that is already beginning to decay. Trapped in the cold, stone tomb of his own theory. He wants to hear the story because he wants to see if her faith can withstand the stench of his own spiritual death. He is daring her to perform a miracle, to call his own dead soul back to life. And she accepts the challenge. She reads the story not as an ancient fable, but as a living, breathing, and immediate truth. Her voice, at first trembling and weak, gains a new and powerful fervor. She is not just reciting words, she is bearing witness to the ultimate possibility, the possibility of resurrection. She is proclaiming that no one, not even the most lost, the most broken, the most spiritually dead soul, is beyond the reach of a divine miraculous grace. Her passionate, unwavering belief in the story is what gives it its power. It is a direct transmission of faith, from her soul to his. Her true greatness, however, is revealed in her reaction to his terrible confession, when he finally whispers the truth, that it was he who ended the lives of the old woman and her sister. Her response is one of the most powerful and revealing moments in all of literature. She does not recoil in horror, she does not judge him, she does not condemn him. Her first, immediate, and purely instinctive reaction is one of immense, overwhelming, and soul-shattering pity. "Oh, what have you done? What have you done to yourself?" she cries, weeping not for his victims, but for the terrible, self-inflicted wound in his own soul. In this single, breathtaking moment, she demonstrates a compassion that is truly Christ-like. She sees past the monstrous act to the miserable, suffering man beneath, and she embraces him. She throws her arms around him and holds him, a sinner clinging to a sinner. She refuses to let him be alone in his damnation. This is the moment that Raskolnikov has unconsciously been searching for his entire life. Not intellectual approval, not a confirmation of his theory, but an act of pure, unconditional, and undeserved grace, a love that meets him at the bottom of his own personal hell and refuses to let go. Her prescription for his redemption is as simple and as profound as her faith. It is not a legal strategy or a philosophical argument. It is a ritual of humility. Go to the crossroads, she commands him. Bow down and kiss the earth, which you have defiled. This act is the perfect, symbolic antidote to his crime. His transgression was an act of supreme, intellectual pride, an attempt to elevate himself above the rest of humanity. Her cure is an act of supreme, physical humility, an instruction to lower himself, to reconnect with the common soil, and to ask forgiveness, not just from a distant God, but from the very earth itself. Sonia, then, is Dostoevsky's final and most powerful answer to the proud, rebellious intellectuals who rage against God's world, while the wise elder Zosima provides the eloquent philosophy of active love. Sonia provides its silent, humble, and lived reality. She is the proof that true spiritual strength is found not in the power of the intellect, but in the power of a humble and compassionate heart. She is the living embodiment of the great Christian paradox, that the first shall be last, that the weak are the truly strong, and that the path to salvation is found not by rising above humanity, but by kneeling with it in the dirt. She is the quiet, unwavering light that guides Raskolnikov out of the darkness of his own mind, a testament to Dostoevsky's profound belief that even in the deepest, most squalid corners of human existence, the divine spark of a pure and loving soul can not only survive, but can shine with a light so bright that it has the power to call the dead back to life. If the teachings of the elder Zosima provide the grand philosophical architecture of Dostoevsky's faith, and the life of Sonia Marmeladova provides its living, breathing embodiment, then it is a simple folk tale, told by one of the novel's most complex sinners, that provides its beating, human heart. This is the parable of the onion, a story so brief it could be told in a single minute, yet so profound it contains the entire weight of Dostoevsky's vision of damnation and grace. It is a perfect, miniature encapsulation of his entire Christian worldview. The story is told at a pivotal moment in the Brothers Karamazov. Ilyosha, the devout and pure-hearted novice, is in the midst of a profound spiritual crisis. His beloved mentor, the elder Zosima, has died, and his body, which Ilyosha and others expected to be preserved in a state of incorruptible sainthood, has instead begun to decay with a shocking and scandalous swiftness. Ilyosha's simple faith is shattered by this brutal intrusion of ugly physical reality, and in his grief and doubt, he leaves the monastery and goes to see Grushenka. She is the novel's central fallen woman, a figure of immense sensual power and worldly cunning, the beautiful, kept woman who has driven both his father and his brother, Dmitri, to the brink of madness. She is, by all measures, a great sinner, and it is to her that the broken Alyosha has come, not for temptation, but for a human connection. And it is she, this complex, earthy, and deeply flawed woman, who tells him the story, the one and only fairy tale, she says, that she has ever known. A story told to her in her childhood by her old cook. There once was a woman, the story goes, and she was a wicked, spiteful, and thoroughly evil woman. When she died, she left behind not a single good deed, and so the devils seized her and cast her into the great lake of fire. But her guardian angel stood before the throne of God and could not bear to see his charge lost forever. And so he began to think, to search her entire life for one single, solitary good deed that he could present to the Lord as a reason for mercy. After a long search, the angel finally remembered one, just one, tiny act of kindness. The wicked woman had once been pulling onions from her garden, and a poor beggar woman had come and asked for one, and she had pulled up a small onion and given it to her. The angel told this to the Lord, and the Lord replied, "Take that very onion and hold it out to her in the lake. Let her catch hold of it and pull, and if you can pull her out of the lake, then let her come to paradise. But if the onion breaks, then the woman must stay where she is." The angel flew down to the lake of fire and found the wicked woman, and he held out the small green onion to her. "Here, woman," he said, "catch hold and pull," and she began to pull, cautiously at first, and he had almost pulled her completely out of the flames, but the other sinners in the lake, seeing her about to be saved, began to catch hold of her legs, hoping to be pulled out with her. But the woman, who was still a wicked, spiteful woman at heart, began to kick at them. "They are pulling me," she cried to the angel. "It's my onion, not theirs." And as soon as she said those words, the stalk of the onion broke. The woman fell back into the lake of fire, where she is burning to this day, and the angel, the story concludes, could only weep and fly away. This is the entire parable. A simple, almost childish story, yet within it, Dostoevsky has hidden the keys to his entire spiritual universe. First, it is a story of immense, almost unbelievable hope. It suggests that even the most wicked soul, a woman who has not a single other good deed to her name, is not beyond the reach of grace. A single tiny act of kindness, the giving of an onion, is enough to initiate the process of salvation. This is a profound statement against any rigid, unforgiving system of justice. In Dostoevsky's world, no soul is ever completely and irrevocably lost. The possibility of redemption is always present, even if it hangs by a thread as thin as an onion stalk. But the story is also a powerful illustration of the failure to practice active love. The very principle that the elder Zosima preached. The woman's salvation is offered, but she rejects it through her own selfishness. Her sin is not in her past wickedness, but in her present inability to feel compassion. Her cry, "It's my onion, not yours," is the cry of the isolated ego. The cry of the soul that cannot see its connection to the other suffering souls around it. She fails the test, not because she is wicked, but because she cannot love. This leads to the parable's deepest meaning. The idea that salvation itself is not an individualistic project. It is communal. The other sinners, who cling to her legs, are not trying to pull her back down. They are trying to rise with her. They are a physical representation of Zosima's great idea that all are responsible for all. The woman's path to paradise is not a solitary one. She must, whether she likes it or not, bring her fellow sufferers with her. True salvation, Dostoevsky suggests, is not escaping the lake of fire alone. It is helping to pull everyone else out with you. It is profoundly significant that it is Grushenka, the fallen woman, who tells this story. She understands its meaning with a depth that the intellectual Ivan could never possess. She tells Alyosha that she herself is that wicked woman, and that this story is the story of her own soul. And in the very act of telling this story to the despairing Alyosha, she is performing a profound act of active love. She is offering him an onion, a small, humble piece of spiritual nourishment in his moment of greatest need. She, the great sinner, is the one who helps the young saint to find his faith again. And the effect on Alyosha is transformative. This simple folk tale, told to him by a woman he had come to tempt, does more to heal his soul than all the learned theology of the monastery. It restores his faith, not in abstract dogma or in the incorruptibility of saints' bodies, but in the profound, mysterious, and ever-present possibility of grace. It is the onion that Grushenka gives him that pulls him out of his own private lake of fire, the lake of doubt and intellectual despair. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated, and life-affirming grace. The parable of the onion, then, is Dostoevsky's vision in miniature. It is a testament to his belief that even the smallest act of kindness has an infinite cosmic significance. It is a warning that the sin of selfishness, the inability to see our connection to the great ocean of humanity, is the one sin that can sever us from grace, and it is a beautiful, hopeful confirmation that spiritual truth is often found not in the proud minds of the righteous, but in the humble, compassionate hearts of the sinners. We now turn from the grand epic canvases of Dostoevsky's major novels to a shorter, more frantic, and deeply personal work. A novella written in a white-hot fever of creative energy in just 26 days. This was a story written not just from imagination, but from the raw, humiliating, and lived experience of its author, for Dostoevsky himself was a compulsive gambler. A man who knew the intoxicating siren song of the roulette wheel, and the gambler is his profound, unflinching confession, an exploration of addiction, fate, and what he saw as the very essence of the Russian soul. The story is set in the fictional German spa town of Roulettenberg, a place that is less a real city and more a state of mind. It is a glittering international hub of desperate hope and quiet ruin, a place where all the normal rules of society, of hard work and rational calculation, have been suspended in favor of the absolute dizzying authority of pure chance. It is here that we meet our narrator, Alexei Ivanovich, a proud, intelligent, and deeply passionate young tutor, serving a dysfunctional, debt-ridden Russian family abroad. Alexei, like all of Dostoevsky's great protagonists, is a man at war with the world, and with himself. He despises the cautious, methodical and, to his mind, boring way of life, embodied by the Europeans around him. Particularly the Germans, he loathes their worship of hard work, their painstaking accumulation of wealth, their belief in logic and order. He sees it as a cowardly, small-minded refusal to truly live. He craves a different path, a single, brilliant, all-or-nothing moment that will transform his entire existence in the blink of an eye, and he finds that path at the roulette table. The act of gambling for Alexei is not merely a desire for money, it is a profound philosophical and spiritual rebellion. It is a declaration of war against the tyranny of reason. It is an embrace of the abyss, a celebration of the exhilarating, terrifying moment when a man risks everything, his last coin, his honor, his very future, on a single spin of the wheel. In that moment, he feels more alive than at any other time. He is standing on the edge of a precipice, and the sensation of that danger, the pure uncut potentiality of either total ruin or absolute victory, is a drug more powerful than any other. This addiction to the abyss is inextricably linked to his obsessive, almost slavish love for Polina Alexandrovna, the proud and beautiful stepdaughter of the family he serves. His love is a torment, a mixture of adoration and humiliation, and he believes that the only way to win her respect, to break free from his lowly position as a mere tutor, is to become her savior, her Napoleon. He dreams of winning an immense fortune, of walking up to her and dumping a mountain of gold at her feet, not just to buy her love, but to prove his own extraordinary nature. The roulette wheel, for him, is a battlefield where he can prove his worthiness. Into this tense world of desperate love and financial ruin arrives one of Dostoevsky's most magnificent and comical characters, the family's matriarch, Antonita Vasilyevna, known to all as grandmother. She is a formidable, 75-year-old Russian landowner, supposedly on her deathbed back in Moscow. But she arrives in Roulettenberg, very much alive and with an iron will. She has come to scorn her pathetic, debt-ridden relatives. But she quickly becomes fascinated by the roulette tables, and in a few short days, this powerful, aristocratic old woman transforms into a fanatical, degenerate gambler. The grandmother is a perfect condensed symbol of the Russian soul as Dostoevsky sees it. She is a creature of immense, chaotic and untamed energy. She scoffs at the idea of cautious, systematic betting. She throws her money down with a wild, aristocratic abandon. She experiences a spectacular, miraculous run of luck, winning a fortune, and she is hailed as a queen, but she cannot stop. She is not interested in the money. She is interested in the thrill, the sensation, the feeling of wrestling with fate itself, and just as quickly, her luck turns, and she loses everything, her entire fortune, in a single, catastrophic evening. Her spectacular rise and fall is the entire arc of the gambler's life, played out in fast motion. Dostoevsky uses the international setting of the casino to draw sharp, satirical portraits of the various European national characters. The French, represented by Polina's suitor, the Marquis de Grieux, are cunning, polite, and obsessed with style and the accumulation of wealth through careful intrigue. The English, represented by the quiet and honorable Mr. Astley, are sensible, reliable, and fundamentally decent. But it is the Russians, with their passionate, reckless, all-or-nothing spirit, who are the true gamblers, the ones who truly understand the poetry of the abyss. This, for Dostoevsky, is the great allegory of the novel. The Russian soul, he suggests, is a maximalist soul. It is not interested in the golden mean, in moderation, in the slow, cautious path of the European. The Russian character is one of extremes, capable of the lowest, most sordid degradation, but also of the most profound spiritual striving. The Russian soul is always betting everything. It is always seeking a final, absolute, and transformative outcome. Whether that is at the roulette table, in a revolutionary cell, or in the search for God, Alexei's journey is the tragic fulfillment of this national character. He has his one great moment of glory, a single miraculous night where his intuition is perfect, where he feels the will of fate coursing through him, and he breaks the bank, winning an unimaginable fortune. He rushes to Polina with his winnings. But the moment is not one of triumph, it is a disaster. She sees not a savior, but a man possessed, a creature who has sold his soul to the demon of chance, and she throws the money back in his face. His great victory has cost him the one thing he truly wanted. And he, like the grandmother, cannot stop. The money itself was never the point. The point was the feeling, the sensation of standing on the edge of the void, and so he loses it all, the entire fortune, and much more besides. His love for Polina is replaced by a new, more powerful and far more destructive obsession. His entire being, his intellect, his passion, his very soul is reduced to a single, repetitive, and ultimately meaningless question. Red or black, odd or even. The man who wanted to be a Napoleon has become a ghost, a hollow shell of a man, haunting the casinos of Europe, forever waiting for the next spin of the wheel. The Gambler is Dostoevsky's profound and deeply personal exploration of the prison of addiction. It is not just an addiction to a game, but an addiction to a state of being, an addiction to pure exhilarating potential, to the magical belief that a single miraculous moment can erase the past and create a new future. It is a powerful warning that the desire to escape the slow, difficult, and often boring work of life by betting everything on a single glorious turn of the wheel can itself become the most miserable and most inescapable prison of all. In the midst of his great sprawling epics, Dostoevsky sometimes condensed his entire universe of ideas into a single perfect and luminous short story. The most beautiful and hopeful of these is The Dream of a Ridiculous Man, a work that is at once a science fiction parable, a Christian allegory, and the most concise summary of his entire spiritual vision. It is the story of a man who travels to the very edge of nothingness, and in that void discovers a truth so simple and so powerful that it changes his life forever. Our narrator is a quintessential Dostoevskian figure, a modern St. Petersburg intellectual who is a direct descendant of the underground man. He is a nihilist, a man who, through long and careful reasoning, has arrived at the absolute and unshakable conviction that nothing matters. This belief is not a source of despair for him, but of a strange, cold freedom. If nothing matters, then there is no right or wrong, no beauty or ugliness, no shame or honor. There is only a great, gray, cosmic indifference. And having arrived at this final logical conclusion, he has decided to complete the thought by ending his own existence. He has purchased a revolver, and he is merely waiting for a night when the stars align, a night when the finality of his decision feels just right. One such night, as he is walking home through the dark, rainy streets, his mind fixed on his final act, a small, desperate figure collides with him. It is a little girl, about 8 years old. Her clothes are ragged, she is shivering, and she is crying with a frantic, breathless terror. She grabs his coat, her voice choked with sobs, trying to tell him that her mother is in some kind of terrible distress nearby. She is begging for his help. The ridiculous man, his mind absorbed in his great final nihilistic thought, responds with a burst of irritable cruelty. He shouts at her, he stamps his foot, he shoos her away like a stray dog, and the little girl runs off, weeping, into the darkness. But as he continues on his way, a strange and unexpected feeling takes root in him. A sharp, piercing pang of pity, and with it, a profound and unfamiliar sense of shame. This feeling is a direct, logical contradiction to his great idea. If nothing in the universe matters, why does this one, small, significant act of cruelty cause him such a deep and agonizing pain? For the first time in years, a crack appears in the smooth, cold surface of his nihilism. He reaches his room. The revolver is on the table. The moment he has been waiting for has arrived, but he cannot do it. The memory of the little girl, of her desperate, tear-stained face, paralyzes him. He is angry at himself, angry at her for disturbing his philosophical peace. He tries to reason the feeling away, but the pain in his heart is more real, more powerful than any of his intellectual convictions. Unable to complete his final act, and tormented by this new, strange emotion, he slumps into his armchair, and with the revolver clutched in his hand, he falls into a deep, profound, and life-altering sleep. In his dream, the story continues. He raises the revolver, not to his temple, but to his heart, and fires. He feels no pain, only a great shock that shakes his entire being, and then, darkness, he finds himself in a coffin, in his own grave, but he is still conscious, still feeling the cold, damp earth pressing in on him. He waits for an eternity in this silent black void, and then a mysterious force opens his grave, and he is lifted up, carried through the infinite, star-filled expanse of deep space, a dead soul on a final, cosmic journey. He arrives on a new world, a planet that is a perfect, sun-drenched duplicate of our own Earth. But it is an Earth that has not yet known sin. It is a Garden of Eden, a vision of the Golden Age. He is greeted by the inhabitants of this world, and they are a vision of perfect, unfallen humanity. They are beautiful, wise, and joyful, their faces shining with a radiant, childlike love. They live in perfect harmony with nature, with the trees, the animals, and with each other. They do not know jealousy, or rage, or shame. Their entire existence is a song of pure, uncomplicated joy and universal love. They welcome him, the strange, tormented visitor from a fallen world, with an open and loving embrace. He lives among them, and for a time he is in paradise. But then, the tragic, inevitable, and terrible event happens. He, the ridiculous man, corrupts them all. He doesn't know how he did it. He only knows that he was the source of the infection. He taught them how to lie, and from that first, single, almost playful act of deception, the entire beautiful edifice of their world begins to crumble into ruin. The lie gives birth to sensuality, which gives birth to jealousy, which gives birth to cruelty, which gives birth to the very first drop of spilled blood. They are horrified by what they have done, but the corruption spreads like a virus. They soon learn about shame, and they make a virtue of it. They learn about honor, and they build fortresses to protect it. They learn the concepts of mine and thine, and they begin to fight over them. They invent science and law to justify their new, sinful state. They forget their former happiness and begin to insist that their current fallen world of struggle and suffering is the only true and real existence. The narrator, the serpent in their Eden, is devastated. He loves these people with a new and painful intensity, and he is the one who has destroyed them. He begs them to punish him, to crucify him, to show him how to atone for his terrible sin, but they only laugh at him. They have become too wise for such things. They threaten to lock him away in a madhouse. If he continues to speak of their lost paradise, he is left to wander their fallen world, weeping for the beauty that he himself has murdered, his heart breaking with a love and a sorrow so profound that he awakens with tears streaming down his face. He awakens in his dark room, in his armchair, a completely and utterly changed man. The dream was so real, so vivid, so powerfully true, that he knows with an absolute and unshakable certainty that he has seen the truth, and the truth, he realizes, is not a complex philosophical system. It is not a scientific formula. It is a single, simple, and almost childishly beautiful law. Love others as you love yourself. That is the whole of it. That is the one simple commandment that the people of his dream world lived by instinctively, and it is the one law that we in our fallen world have forgotten how to follow. His nihilism, his belief that nothing matters, is completely and totally shattered. He now knows that everything matters, that a single act of kindness or a single act of cruelty has a profound and an eternal significance. He casts the revolver aside. His life no longer his to take. His new purpose is to go out and to preach, to tell the world of the truth he has seen, to remind a fallen humanity of the paradise that is still possible, if only they can relearn that one simple and ancient law. He knows that people will call him a ridiculous man, that they will mock him, that they will think he is a madman, but it no longer matters to him, for he has seen the truth. He has found the little girl he shooed away, and he will continue to search for her. His journey is no longer a journey towards nothingness, but a lifelong quest to put into practice the one simple and profoundly beautiful idea that has the power to turn our fallen earth back into a paradise. The idea that a single moment of true, active love is more real, more powerful, and more important than all the cold, logical proofs of a meaningless universe. In our journey through Dostoevsky's world, we have encountered men possessed by ideas, men wrestling with their faith, and men crushed by the burden of their own freedom. But beneath all of these grand philosophical dramas lies a profound and deeply modern psychological insight. The idea that the human consciousness is not a unified whole, but a fractured, chaotic, and often contradictory battlefield. Dostoevsky was a master of portraying this inner division, and his most powerful tool for doing so was the recurring motif of the double, or the doppelganger. This is not the simple evil twin of Gothic fiction. For Dostoevsky, the double is a projection, a manifestation of a repressed or unacknowledged part of a protagonist's own soul. His characters are so consumed by their internal conflicts, so torn between their angelic aspirations and their demonic impulses, that their very psyche seems to split in two. One half remains the tormented protagonist we know, and the other half steps out of the mirror and into the real world, a walking, talking embodiment of their darkest thoughts, their most cynical doubts, or their most depraved desires. The first, and perhaps most chilling example of this, is the relationship between Raskolnikov and Svidrigailov. On the surface, they are two very different men, but spiritually, they are brothers, twins, born of the same nihilistic idea. Svidrigailov is the dark double of Raskolnikov. He is a living, breathing answer to the question that haunts Raskolnikov throughout the entire novel: what would I become if I truly succeeded? If I silenced my conscience completely and lived as if everything is permitted? Svidrigailov is that man. Raskolnikov is a transgressor in theory, a man whose humanity is still at war with his monstrous idea. He suffers, he doubts, he is tormented by his conscience. Svidrigailov is a transgressor in practice, a man who has long since murdered his own conscience. He feels no remorse, no guilt, only a profound and soul-crushing boredom. He has stepped over every moral line and has found on the other side not a new world of freedom and power, but an empty, meaningless void. He is a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, a man for whom all sensations, from charity to depravity, have become equally dull. When Raskolnikov looks at Svidrigailov, he is looking into a horrifying mirror. He sees the pathetic, sordid, and deeply un-Napoleonic reality of his own grand theory. He sees that the path of the man-god does not lead to a throne, but to a grimy tavern, to a profound and eternal state of ennui. Svidrigailov is a walking, talking refutation of Raskolnikov's entire worldview, a terrifying vision of his own potential damnation, and his presence forces Raskolnikov to recoil from the very philosophy he has staked his life on. In the Brothers Karamazov, this device becomes even more complex and explicit. The brilliant intellectual, Ivan Karamazov, who argues that everything is permitted, also has a double, but his is not a fellow aristocrat. It is the lowly, resentful, and cunning servant, Smerdyakov. Smerdyakov is the vulgar, practical embodiment of Ivan's sophisticated, abstract philosophy. He is the ape to Ivan's intellectual Superman, the creature who takes Ivan's elegant, philosophical justifications for amorality and translates them into a single, brutal, and self-serving act: the elimination of their father. Smerdyakov is the hands to Ivan's head. He is the ugly, undeniable, real-world consequence of Ivan's dangerous ideas during their final, terrible confrontation. Smerdyakov throws Ivan's own philosophy back in his face, with a sneering, triumphant logic. "You were the real one who did it," he says. "I was only your instrument, your faithful hound." He forces Ivan to confront the terrible truth that his words, his ideas, were the true weapon in the crime. Smerdyakov is the living proof that there are no innocent thoughts, that a philosophy that permits everything will inevitably be put into practice by the man who has nothing to lose. Ivan's double is not just a reflection of his ideas, but a judgment upon them. He shows Ivan that his grand, tragic, Byronic rebellion against God is, in practice, just a sordid justification for a greedy, resentful servant to get what he wants. Smerdyakov is the ugly, unpoetic, and deeply pathetic truth of Ivan's grand philosophical lie. He is the embodiment of the base, selfish reality that lurks beneath all the beautiful, intellectual talk of a world without God. But Ivan's psyche is so fractured, his internal war so intense, that one double is not enough. As the weight of his guilt crushes him, his mind finally breaks, and his inner conflict manifests as a literal physical hallucination. He is visited by the devil, but this is not the grand satanic prince of darkness. He is not a figure of terrifying Miltonic grandeur. Instead, he is a shabby, down-on-his-heels Russian gentleman, a freeloader, with slightly vulgar manners, who is dressed in cheap, unfashionable clothes. This devil is the ultimate psychological horror. He does not bring new tempting ideas from the outside. He simply takes Ivan's own thoughts, his own doubts, his own cynical and petty arguments, and parrots them back to him in a cheap, vulgar, and mocking form. He is the embodiment of all the smallness, the spite and the mediocrity that exists within Ivan's own soul, the side that Ivan has tried to repress beneath his grand, tragic performance as a great rebel. The devil is Ivan's own inner underground man, made flesh. The terror for Ivan is not that he is talking to the devil. The terror is the slow, dawning realization that the devil is him. He is arguing with the most banal and pathetic parts of his own consciousness. The devil's very shabbiness is a mockery of Ivan's grand romantic rebellion. It suggests that his profound, world-changing atheism is at its core just the whining of a cheap freeloader. It is the final, devastating humiliation of an intellect that has placed itself on the throne of God, only to find that its kingdom is a second-rate room occupied by a tiresome and unimpressive bore. The double, then, is Dostoevsky's most powerful and most modern psychological insight. It is his way of dramatizing the profound and often violent fragmentation of the modern soul. His characters are so torn between the shores of good and evil, between the temptations of the mind and the truths of the heart, that they literally split in two. Their inner monologue becomes an outer dialogue. Their repressed desires walk through the door and sit down for a chat. Their greatest enemy is not the world, it is the other, darker half of their own being. This is the ultimate expression of the Karamazov nature. The idea that the human soul is a battlefield where God and the devil are at war, in Dostoevsky's world. That war is not just a metaphor, it is a literal psychological reality, and the journey of his great protagonists is always a journey to confront their own dark double, to acknowledge the Svidrigailov or the Smerdyakov, or the shabby devil that lives within them, and to either be consumed by that darkness or to find, through grace and suffering, a path back to a fragile and hard-won wholeness. Running like a great powerful river beneath all of Dostoevsky's psychological and philosophical explorations is a deep, passionate, and often contradictory belief in the unique, messianic destiny of his own people. To understand Dostoevsky fully, we must attempt to understand his vision of the Russian soul, a concept he saw as the great hope for a world that was rapidly losing its faith, a soul defined by its immense breadth, its embrace of extremes, and its unique capacity for both the most profound sin and the most profound repentance. Dostoevsky, like the Slavophile thinkers of his time, believed that the Russian people were a God-bearing nation. He saw Western Europe as spiritually exhausted. He believed the Catholic Church had succumbed to the logic of the Grand Inquisitor, trading Christ's freedom for earthly power, and he saw Protestantism as a cold, rational system that had lost the mystical heart of Christianity. In his view, only Russian Orthodoxy had preserved the pure, uncorrupted image of Christ, a faith based not on power or logic, but on communal love, humility, and a mystical connection to the earth. This was not a simple jingoistic patriotism, it was a deeply spiritual conviction. Dostoevsky believed that Russia's destiny was not to conquer the world with armies, but to one day offer a new word to a spiritually bankrupt West, a word of universal brotherhood based on the teachings of Christ. But the soul that was to deliver this message was not a simple or a placid one. It was, in his portrayal, a chaotic, passionate, and terrifyingly broad battlefield. A place where the highest ideals and the basest appetites were locked in a constant and often violent struggle for supremacy. The ultimate embodiment of this idea is Dmitry Karamazov, the passionate, sensual, and deeply human brother who is the beating heart of Dostoevsky's final masterpiece. Mitya is a man who lives his life at a fever pitch. He is capable of noble generosity and profound spiritual insights, one moment, and of the most degrading jealousy, rage, and sensual indulgence the next. He is a living, breathing paradox, a man who is both a sinner and a saint, a beast and an angel, all at the very same time, and he is acutely, painfully aware of this inner division. In one of the most famous passages in all of Dostoevsky's work, Dmitry confesses the secret of this Karamazov nature. He explains that a man can be filled with the highest of ideals, the ideal of the Madonna, and yet at the very same time carry in his heart the ideal of Sodom. He is a man whose soul is so broad, he says, that it can contain both extremes and find a strange, terrible beauty in both. This, for Dostoevsky, is the defining feature of the Russian soul, its maximalism, its refusal of the golden mean, its ability to encompass the full terrifying spectrum of human potential. This rejection of moderation is a theme Dostoevsky explored in detail in his novella The Gambler. He contrasts the passionate, reckless, all-or-nothing spirit of the Russians at the roulette table with the cautious, methodical, and sensible approach of the Germans and the English, the European. In his view, lives a life of careful calculation, of moderation, of the golden mean, but the Russian soul is not interested in half measures. It is always betting everything on a single spin of the wheel, always seeking the final, absolute, and transformative outcome, whether in sin or in salvation. This same capacity for extreme sin, Dostoevsky believed, gives the Russian soul a unique and unparalleled capacity for extreme repentance. A man who has lived his entire life in a state of comfortable, respectable moderation cannot possibly understand the depths of his own sinfulness, or the profound, desperate need for grace. But a man like Dmitri, a man who has touched the very bottom of the abyss, who has wallowed in his own degradation, possesses a knowledge, a terrible, first-hand wisdom, that the merely respectable man can never have. His fall is what makes his potential rise so glorious. We see this in the simple peasant characters who often appear in the novels. They are sinners, they are drunkards, they are fools, but they possess a deep instinctual understanding of their own sinfulness and a humble, almost childlike faith in God's forgiveness. It is the painter Nikolai from The Possessed, who, out of a free-floating sense of guilt, falsely confesses to a terrible crime, simply to take on a cross, to accept a suffering that he feels he deserves. It is a profoundly irrational act. But in Dostoevsky's world, it is an act of deep, almost holy spiritual instinct. This leads to the recurring and powerful figure of the holy fool, or the Eurodivi, in Dostoevsky's work. These are characters like Sonia Marmeladova or even Prince Mishkin, figures who are outcasts in the eyes of the world, who are seen as idiots or shamed sinners, but who, in their humility and their suffering, possess a spiritual wisdom that is far more profound than that of the proud and the powerful. Their worldly foolishness is a sign of their divine wisdom, a testament to Dostoevsky's belief that the truth of Christ is often found in the most unlikely and most despised of vessels. Dostoevsky's vision for Russia, then, was a deeply religious and messianic one. He believed that the rational, godless ideologies of the West would inevitably lead to a spiritual and political apocalypse, a world of crystal palaces and Grand Inquisitors. He hoped that Russia, by turning away from these Western temptations and embracing its own unique, orthodox, and deeply suffering soul, could offer a different path forward, a path based not on a social contract, but on a spiritual brotherhood, a path based on the profound, mystical truth that all are responsible for all. It is a vision that can be seen as nationalistic, even chauvinistic, and it is full of its own contradictions and passions, just like the characters he created. But at its core, Dostoevsky's patriotism was not a political program. It was an article of faith, a desperate, passionate, and deeply felt belief that the future of the world depended on the ability of the human heart to contain and ultimately transcend its own most terrible contradictions. A feat he believed the broad and mysterious Russian soul was uniquely qualified to achieve. In the proud, intellectual, and deeply alienated world of Dostoevsky's great thinkers, where characters live and die for the sake of abstract theories, there is a recurring and profoundly physical act. A gesture that cuts through all the noise of the mind and speaks a more ancient, more powerful truth. This is the act of bowing down and kissing the earth. It is a strange, primal, and deeply symbolic ritual that appears at the most pivotal moments of spiritual crisis and transformation, and it is the ultimate antidote to the great disease that afflicts the modern soul, the disease of alienation. This gesture is rooted in the deep, pre-Christian and Orthodox soul of Russia, in the concept of moist Mother Earth, a living, breathing, and sacred entity. For Dostoevsky's characters, the earth is not just dirt, it is a witness, it is a source of life, and it is the ultimate symbol of a divine reality that exists outside of their own proud, isolated minds. To kiss the earth is to perform an act of profound humility, to reject the arrogance of the intellect, and to reconnect with the great sacred body of creation. It is a physical prayer, a confession made not with words, but with the body itself. The most famous and most agonizing instance of this act is, of course, Raskolnikov's public penance. It is Sonia, the embodiment of humble faith, who commands him to perform this ritual. "Go to the crossroads," she tells him, "bow down, and kiss the earth which you have defiled." The command is specific and profound. His crime, an act of supreme intellectual pride, was of defilement, not just of his victims, but of the very ground on which he stood, and so his first act of repentance must be to ask gifts from that same ground. For Raskolnikov, this is the most difficult task imaginable. His entire being, his pride, his theory, his contempt for the common herd, all of it rebels against this absurd and humiliating gesture. What is the point? His intellect screams of kneeling in the filth of the Haymarket to be mocked by the very lice he despises. But his journey has taught him the bankruptcy of his own intellect. And so, driven by the memory of Sonia's faith, he surrenders, he kneels in the mud, and he kisses the dirty city earth, an act of profound self-abasement that is also his first true act of liberation. In that moment, he is no longer Napoleon, no longer the extraordinary man standing alone above humanity. He is a sinner, rejoining the common, suffering, and deeply flawed human family. He is acknowledging that he is a part of the earth, not a master of it. The laughter of the crowd is meaningless, because the act is not for them. It is a sacrament between him and the creation he has wounded. It is the physical breaking of his own pride, the necessary prelude to the healing of his soul. It is the beginning of the end of his alienation. If Raskolnikov's kiss is an act of agonizing penance, then Ivan Karamazov's is an act of pure, mystical ecstasy. After the death of his beloved elder Zosima and his own subsequent crisis of faith, Alyosha's spirit is healed by a vision of Christ at the wedding in Cana. He leaves the monk's cell and goes out into the monastery garden, overwhelmed by a new, powerful sense of divine love. He looks up at the starry night sky, and he is overcome by a feeling of profound, joyful connection to all of creation. He falls to the ground, not in shame, but in a rapture of love. He embraces the earth and kisses it, weeping with a kind of holy, ecstatic joy. He watered the earth with his tears, Dostoevsky writes, and vowed to love it forever and ever, for Alyosha. This is not an act of repentance, it is an act of union. He feels the threads from all God's worlds meeting together in his soul. He is affirming the sacredness of every leaf, every blade of grass, every star in the sky. It is the ultimate expression of Zosima's active love, a love that extends to all of creation. This deep, spiritual connection to the earth is a core part of the elder Zosima's own teachings. He instructs his followers to love to fall upon the earth and kiss it, to love it with an unceasing, consuming love. He sees the world not as a fallen, sinful place to be escaped, but as a garden, a flawed, but still beautiful reflection of a divine paradise. He teaches that every part of creation, from the smallest insect to the most distant star, is part of a great, sacred mystery, and to kiss the earth is to acknowledge that mystery, to humble oneself before a truth that is far greater than any human intellect. This idea is not just the domain of the great saints and sinners, it is a part of the deep, instinctual faith of the Russian people. We see it in the figure of the holy fool Maria Lebedenkina, from The Possessed. In her strange prophetic ramblings, she speaks of the earth as the mother of God and says that the greatest joy is to wet the earth with one's tears. She represents a primal, pre-intellectual, and deeply feminine spirituality, a connection to the sacredness of the earth that the proud male intellectuals have lost. She understands, with the simple wisdom of a fool, a truth that the brilliant Stavrogin can never grasp. The act of kissing the earth, then, is the ultimate cure for the disease of Dostoevsky's modern heroes. Their sickness is alienation. They are cut off. They live entirely in the sterile, airless prison of their own minds. Their prideful theories have severed their connection to God, to their fellow human beings, and to the natural world. Raskolnikov in his coffin-like room, Ivan in his intellectual tavern, Stavrogin in his bored, empty void. They are all men who have forgotten that they are a part of the world. They believe they can stand outside of it and judge it. The physical, humbling, and deeply irrational act of falling to the ground and kissing it shatters this illusion. It forces the character out of his head and back into his body, back into the world of the senses, back into a direct, unmediated relationship with God's creation. It is an act of grounding, both literally and spiritually. It is an acknowledgement that we are not gods, we are not angels, we are creatures of the earth, and it is only by embracing our humble earthly nature that we can hope to find a path back to a spiritual heaven. To read Dostoevsky in the 21st century is to be struck by a profound and deeply unsettling feeling. The feeling that you are not reading a 19th century novelist, but a prophet, a man who looked so deeply into the soul of his own time that he saw the terrifying shape of the future. His work is filled with a political, social, and spiritual foresight that is nothing short of breathtaking, and his darkest and most explicitly prophetic novel, The Possessed, stands as a timeless and necessary warning, a perfect blueprint for the totalitarian nightmares that would consume the world long after he was gone. Dostoevsky understood that the radical, nihilistic ideas that were sweeping through the young intellectuals of his day were not just a passing fashion. He saw that these were not the harmless romantic theories of his own liberal generation, but were a new and terrible kind of faith, a secular religion that sought to build a heaven on earth, and he knew, with a certainty that his contemporaries dismissed as reactionary paranoia, that any attempt to build a paradise by force on a foundation of atheism and pure reason would inevitably create a hell of unimaginable proportions. The most chillingly accurate of all his prophecies is the political program developed by the grim philosopher of the revolutionary cell, Smerdyakov. His theory, which he calls Smerdyakofism, is presented as a logical and final solution to the problem of human happiness, and it serves as a perfect point-by-point prediction of the totalitarian states, both fascist and communist, that would emerge in the next century. His starting point is a paradox that would come to define the modern age. Starting from unlimited freedom, he says, I arrive at unlimited despotism. This is the great seductive lie of all totalitarian movements. They promise a future of perfect freedom and equality. But they argue that to achieve this utopia, society must first pass through a period of absolute, unquestioning, and temporary dictatorship. The unlimited freedom of the future is used to justify the unlimited despotism of the present. Dostoevsky saw through this lie with a terrifying clarity. He knew that the despotism would never be temporary, and that the promised freedom was an illusion, a bait used to lure humanity into a new and more perfect form of slavery. Smerdyakof's plan for this new world is a masterpiece of social engineering and pure, unadulterated horror. He proposes that to achieve true equality, 90% of humanity must be stripped of all individuality, all freedom, and all higher consciousness. They will be reduced to the state of a docile, obedient herd, living in a kind of primeval innocence. They will work, they will reproduce, and they will be happy. The simple, untroubled happiness of livestock. All higher culture, all art, all science and genius will be stamped out. A Cicero will have his tongue cut out, one of the revolutionaries gleefully proclaims. A Copernicus will have his eyes put out. A Shakespeare will be stoned. And who will rule over this great human herd, the remaining 10%, the elite, the extraordinary men? They will be the keepers of the secret, the new gods who will guide the flock. This is the great secret of the Grand Inquisitor. Made real in the world of secular politics, it is a world where the vast majority of humanity has willingly traded their terrible, burdensome freedom for bread, for security, and for a simple, childlike happiness. It is the vision of the Crystal Palace, but with the full, horrifying knowledge that its foundations are built on the deliberate destruction of the human spirit. Dostoevsky's prophecy did not just extend to the structure of these future states, but to the very psychology of the men who would lead them. The leader of the revolutionary cell, Pyotr Verkhovensky, is a perfect prototype of the 20th century dictator. He is not a passionate idealist. He is not a true believer in Smerdyakof's system. He is a cynical, vain, and deeply mediocre man, who is in love not with an idea, but with the thrill of chaos and the taste of power. He uses ideology as a tool, a means to manipulate the resentments and insecurities of his followers. He understands that the most effective way to bind people together is not through love or loyalty, but through a shared, unforgivable transgression. He forces his followers to participate in the elimination of a dissenting member, making them all complicit, chaining them to him through a bond of shared guilt and mutual fear. This is the very logic of the political purge, the show trial, the secret police. It is the discovery that terror is the most efficient and most reliable of all political instruments. Dostoevsky saw that the new tyrants would not be grand, Napoleonic figures, but petty, spiteful, and deeply resentful men. Clowns of vanity who would burn the world down just to feel important. His greatest prophecy, however, was not political but spiritual. He understood that the true source of the 20th century's horrors would be the practical, real-world consequences of the death of God. If there is no God, no immortal soul, then there is no sacred, intrinsic value to a human life. A person becomes mere material, an object to be used, re-educated, discarded, or eliminated for the sake of a higher idea, whether that idea is the purity of the race, the triumph of the proletariat, or the creation of a perfect rational state. This is the final horrifying triumph of Raskolnikov's arithmetic of crime. The idea that one life can be sacrificed for the good of 100 becomes the guiding principle of the modern state. The single sordid event in a St. Petersburg apartment is magnified 1,000,000-fold, and it becomes the Holocaust. It becomes the Gulag. It becomes the killing fields. The great atrocities of the 20th century were all at their core Raskolnikov's crime, committed on an industrial scale. They were all justified by a cold, utilitarian logic, by a belief that the individual human soul is a trivial price to pay for the creation of a future paradise. Dostoevsky's novels, then, are a timeless and profoundly necessary warning. He saw, with a clarity that still shocks, the full destructive potential of the ideas that the modern world had just begun to unleash. He understood that any political or social system, no matter how noble its stated goals, that seeks to perfect humanity by stripping it of its freedom, its irrationality, its contradictions, and its spiritual dimension, will not create a utopia. It will create the most efficient and most miserable prison ever conceived. He stood as a prophet at the dawn of the modern age, and warned us that the path to the Crystal Palace, the path to a man-made heaven on earth, would be paved with an ocean of blood. He showed us that the demons that would haunt the coming century were not supernatural creatures from hell, but in fact, ideas. The proud, rational, and terribly seductive ideas that are born in the minds of men who have decided that they know better than God. We have journeyed through a world of profound and agonizing questions, a world of proud theorists, tormented rebels, holy fools, and passionate sinners. We have stood in the squalid room of a murderer, in the dark cell of the Grand Inquisitor, and in the quiet, luminous presence of a saint, and now, at the end of our journey, we must ask the final question: what is Dostoevsky's ultimate answer to the chaos, the doubt, and the suffering that he so masterfully portrayed? What is his final word on how to live in the modern world? The first thing we must understand is that Dostoevsky does not offer easy answers. His greatness lies not in providing a simple, comforting solution, but in his unflinching honesty about the profound and often terrifying complexity of the human soul. He rejects, with a fierce and passionate energy, all the simple, one-sided solutions that the modern world has to offer. He rejects the rationalist utopia, the glittering crystal palace, as a soulless prison that denies our irrational need for freedom. He rejects the nihilist's dream of the man-God, showing it to be a path that leads only to madness, tyranny, or a profound and empty despair. And he rejects the cold, compassionate slavery offered by the Grand Inquisitor, the offer of bread and security in exchange for our spiritual liberty. Dostoevsky's final answer is not a neat, logical formula. It is not a political program or a philosophical system. It is instead a profound and challenging embrace of paradox, a vision of life that finds its deepest meaning, not in the resolution of conflict, but in the constant, dynamic, and life-giving tension between the great, warring opposites of the human heart. The first of these great paradoxes is that faith is found through doubt. Dostoevsky is not a writer of simple, childlike piety. His most powerful portraits of faith are not those who have never questioned, but those who have looked directly into the abyss of Ivan Karamazov's rebellion and have emerged with their belief intact, but transformed. The elder Zosima, the novel's great saint, is powerful precisely because his wisdom is forged in a lifetime of worldly experience, and spiritual struggle. Dostoevsky himself famously wrote that his Hosanna had not come to him like that of a child, but had passed through a great furnace of doubt. For Dostoevsky, a faith that has not been tested by the profound and honest questions of a suffering world is a faith that is not worth having. He does not ask us to ignore Ivan's arguments against God. He asks us to confront them, to feel their full devastating weight, and to then, in the face of that doubt, make a free and conscious choice, a leap of faith into a truth that the intellect alone cannot grasp. True faith is not the absence of doubt, it is the courage to believe in spite of it. The second great paradox is that redemption is found through suffering. In a modern world that sees suffering as the ultimate evil, a problem to be solved or engineered out of existence, Dostoevsky makes the radical claim that suffering is a necessary and even a beautiful part of the human spiritual journey. It is the great and terrible medicine for the soul's most fatal disease, the disease of pride. It is Raskolnikov's torment that breaks his intellectual arrogance and opens him up to Sonia's love. It is Dmitri Karamazov's unjust conviction that awakens in him a new sense of spiritual purpose and a connection to all the babes who suffer. It is Sonia's own profound suffering that is the source of her almost supernatural compassion. Suffering, for Dostoevsky, is the great equalizer, the force that shatters our proud, selfish illusions and forces us to confront our own vulnerability, our own humility, and our own desperate need for a grace that is greater than ourselves. He does not ask us to seek out suffering, but to accept the cross that life gives us, and to believe that in that acceptance there is the potential for a profound and miraculous regeneration of the soul. The third and final paradox is that true freedom is found through servitude. We have seen how the nihilists dream of unlimited freedom. The idea that everything is permitted leads only to a new and more terrible form of slavery. A slavery to one's own chaotic whims, a slavery to the empty, boring void of a man like Stavrodin. Dostoevsky's final, brilliant countermove is to argue that true freedom is found not in the rejection of all masters, but in the conscious, loving, and voluntary choice of the right one. True freedom, he suggests, is the act of choosing, against all of our own selfish and prideful instincts, to serve a higher truth, to serve the ideal of Christ. It is the freedom to practice the active love that Zosima preached, the freedom to accept the awesome responsibility that all are responsible for all. It is the freedom to give away your last onion. It is the freedom to kiss the earth you have defiled. This willing servitude to a moral and spiritual ideal is, for Dostoevsky, the ultimate and most glorious expression of a truly free will. And so, we arrive at Dostoevsky's final word. The one simple concept that ties all these paradoxes together: love. This is not the sentimental, easy love of dreams that Zosima warned against. It is a harsh, difficult, and profoundly active love. It is the boundless, unconditional pity of Sonia embracing the unlovable Raskolnikov. It is the mystical joy of Alyosha embracing the earth. It is the choice to see the divine spark in the face of your suffering, flawed, and often infuriating neighbor. This active, compassionate love is the only force capable of healing the fractured modern soul, of bridging the terrible gap between the isolated, prideful individual and the rest of the human family. It is the final unspoken answer to Ivan's rebellion, the silent, forgiving kiss that Christ gives to the Grand Inquisitor. It is a truth that cannot be proven with logic, but can only be lived, only be felt, only be acted upon in the world. Dostoevsky's legacy, then, is not a neat system or a comforting ideology. It is a profound and enduring challenge. A challenge to embrace the full, contradictory, and glorious difficulty of being human. The glory of our existence is that we are created free. The burden is that this freedom is a terrifying responsibility. The glory is our capacity for a profound, transformative love. The burden is that this love demands that we suffer. The glory is that we can seek a higher truth. The burden is that our path to that truth must take us through the darkest valleys of doubt. His final word is not a promise of a crystal palace, not a blueprint for a perfect world, but an invitation to live on the battlefield of our own hearts, to accept the terrible, beautiful burden of our own humanity, and to find in the midst of our own sin and our own suffering the one simple and miraculous truth that has the power to make us whole, the truth of active, courageous, and unconditional love.